Hey, good evening, it's Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Alex,
How are you?
good. Mark, we have 4 members of the committee. We have a 9, oops. Cursor doesn't want to operate. Okay, there we go. Oh, there's Patty, great. Okay, now we have, getting a little nervous there. All right, just gonna unmute, make sure members of the committee are unmuted. Okay, great. All right, I think we'll get started. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. I'm just sharing the agenda. So good evening, everyone. It is 7:32 p.m. This is the Housing Protection Plan Advisory Subcommittee. My name is Michelle Capano. I am chair. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Members that are present tonight are Mark Cullinan, Michael Raworth, Michelle Capano, Lynn Spencer, Patty Karras. I didn't miss anybody. I don't think so. Okay, fantastic. All right. Tonight, you'll see that I structured the meeting with specific time slots so we can cover all the items that we need to cover within by 8:30, and certainly leave time at the end for any public comment. The first thing on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes. I sent out 3 sets of meeting minutes to get us caught up now, finally. May 11th, June 8th, and August 10th. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review them. Are there any questions to any of the meeting minutes, any updates or changes that we need to make?
Michelle, why don't I make a motion and then we can discuss if people have any discussions on it?
Okay, sounds
Okay,
great.
why don't I make a motion to include all of the minutes? So I move that we approve the meeting minutes of May 11th, 2023, June 8th, 2023, and August 10th, 2023.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, discussion. And let's just see Jim just joined.
This is Lynn speaking. I would like to congratulate the meeting writer for the thoroughness and clarity of the minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
They are outstanding, and as the recording secretary, I can't take credit for them. So, thanks for your help, Michelle.
Yeah, no problem. So if there aren't any changes to the meeting minutes, I'm gonna ask for a roll call vote. So Mark,
Yes.
okay, Michael,
Aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
Patty,
Aye.
and Jim, I saw you joined a couple of minutes late. We were talking about approving the meeting minutes. I'm gonna unmute you too, I'm sorry. We should be able to Great.
I wasn't at that meeting. I can't approve or disapprove.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay. Not present. Very good. Okay. And just making some notes here. And I see Patrick is joining us, so that's great. All right. Let's make sure Patrick is unmuted. Okay, so then the next item on our agenda tonight is we're going to review the feedback that was compiled from our in-person community forums and the feedback from the online survey. MAPC is here with us tonight, Alex Kopelman and John Cruz. They're going to walk us through the findings, and that's going to lead us into some of the subsequent items on the agenda this evening. The final recommendations into the housing plan, and then discussing on proposed development sites. So I'm going to actually pull up the meeting materials.
Michelle, can you please take Alex off mute and give him the ability to screen share?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, yeah, we've got everything ready to go in a presentation, so we can just pull that up, Michelle.
Okay, let me just get that situated. So I'm making you host, Alex. And get out of this, and you should have it.
Perfect. All right, so should we get into the presentation?
Please.
All right, well, hey, it's great to see everybody again. I know it's been a little while since we got together. The last time we got together, we were preparing for our forum that we held in June. And since then, we've put out a big survey that gathered a lot of responses to the draft recommendations that we've made. So we're giving folks a month to fill that out. And now that's been done, and we have processed the results. So we are excited to share that with you this evening. And then the primary purpose of the meeting tonight is really to decide on the recommendations that we want to include in the plan based on that input, as well as all the work that we've done over the last 7 or so months. I understand that there's a new committee member. Josie, is Josie here tonight?
I think she is. Hold on, let me unmute her. You know what, Alex, if you're a host, you might have that capability. It's not letting me.
Okay, I asked you to unmute. Did that work, Josie?
You're still on mute, Josie. I don't know. Alex, you want to try again?
It gives me the option to ask to unmute. Oh, I think
You want-
you had done it.
Yep, we see you. There you go.
There you go.
You should be
Hey,
able
Josie,
to.
just wanted to welcome you to the committee, and just for John and I's benefit, just wanted to see if you want to share a little bit about your background and interest in the plan.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm Josie Reese. I have been a member of many committees in different towns that I've lived in. I have been a board of directors of Fairfield County, Connecticut, Habitat for Humanity. I've also been in the mortgage industry. I'm currently a negotiator for GE. So I'm very interested in the housing committee because I know that there's a lot of options that we can continue to explore. And once the committee and the town has made some decisions, I know that I can help you move things forward because of my background. So happy to make sure that the town is well prepared for the future and trying to keep as much integrity and abilities and options for everybody. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Josie. It's great to have you. For your benefit and also as just a refresher for the rest of the committee, I just wanted to go over some of the basics of a housing production plan. You know, this is something that we went over in our first initial meetings together last fall, but just as a refresher, so you can see that now that we're towards the end, how this all kind of fits together. A housing production plan is that it is just a plan. It outlines what we are proposing the town focus on in terms of meeting housing need. That is the primary reason to have a housing production plan, is to address the needs of your community and expand housing options in town. And it is a roadmap for how to do that, but it is not a binding document. Anything that we recommend in here would have to go through additional steps in public process to actually be implemented, such as a zoning change or anything else. But we're here to say that based on what we've learned from all of the data that we've gathered, from all the public that we've engaged, this is how we propose Nahant move forward in meeting its housing need. It's also a way to say where the town thinks the right kind of housing should be located and encouraged and incentivized. So rather than reacting to proposed development, this is a way to proactively say, this is where we think it should go. This is how we think it should be. As a secondary purpose of a housing production plan, you can also comply with a state law that requires all communities to be at 10% in terms of subsidized housing or affordable housing, generally speaking. So Nahant's below that 10%, but through adopting this plan and making some progress on the housing front, you can avoid having basically unplanned or hostile developments that can happen when you're not in compliance with this state law. So this is also a way to do that. And then, as everyone knows, we are also working towards another state requirement called Chapter 3A, which asks all communities, generally speaking, to make a zoning ordinance that encourages multifamily development, generally speaking. So this plan will also inform our process for that, which is what we will shift our focus to in October. The elements of a housing production plan, just quickly. First is to gather all of the data and input from the public to really understand what the housing needs are in town. So we have done that. We've had many meetings reviewing that. That was the focus of our first forum. Based on that data and the input we collected, we established goals to guide all the other recommendations of this plan. So that has also already been done. And then based on those goals, we presented draft recommendations for strategies and areas to encourage housing growth and affordable housing. Based on those goals, we proposed that at the last forum. So here tonight, we're really looking to finalize the strategies and start to talk about some of the specifics of the strategies. And so this committee has been guiding the process all the way along. MAPC's role as a consultant to the town is really to gather all this data and technical information. And then the committee is here to share insights and local expertise to really guide the process and guide decision making. So the process started last summer. We started meeting in November. And so we're about 7 months later, near the end of this housing production plan process, where we're drafting the actual plan report. And so the key step to allow MAPC to move forward in drafting a plan for all of us to review is to finalize the recommendations that we've gathered all this input on. So the immediate next steps will be for MAPC, based on the conversation tonight, to draft that report. And then we will meet again with the committee in September to review that draft report. We will make changes, have discussions about some more specifics on recommendations, then finalize that draft, send it to the Nahant Select Board and Planning Board, who will then have to vote on whether to adopt the plan or not. And that'll be a time for committee members to come and advocate for the plan during the public comment period. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is really to discuss the results of our engagement so that we can finalize the strategies in the plan and finalize the development opportunity sites that we've identified, and think about some of the areas that we want to focus on for 3A zoning, which we will then move on to in October. Are there any questions about that before I move forward?
Development opportunity sites means what exactly?
So we'll get into more of that again tonight, but this is the sites that we spent meetings talking about, where essentially the town wants to encourage expansion of the housing stock, encourage affordable housing. These are not sites that we're saying that you want to buy or really do. There's no binding agreement for any of this. It's basically identifying where we think is suitable areas and opportunities to grow that housing stock and affordable housing.
Jim, you wanted to speak?
I did. I wanted to ask what you mentioned, the 10% goal. You did not mention the 1.5% land area goal. Is there a reason for that?
That is documented and spelled out in the written housing goals for the plan, which is in the document I think you all reviewed at the last meeting. So there are multiple ways to achieve safe harbor through 40B. One of them is the 10% SHI, another is to make a small increase on the SHI, and another is the GLAM, general land area minimum. Stantec provided analysis of that. It's not the focus of MAPC, but based on Stantec's analysis, we understand that essentially if the town developed a couple sites that added up to additional 3.5 acres of land used for affordable housing, you could reach safe harbor through GLAM as well.
And by develop, you mean that it basically places housing on those sites, correct?
Yes, based on the state's requirements for that ability to reach safe harbor, the land actually has to be used for affordable housing, which means affordable housing would have to be built.
Okay. And
That's not excluded. Is that right? As an option?
No, absolutely not. But you know,
Right.
our
You
primary.
just, you didn't mention it. That's all. Okay, got it. Go ahead.
Sure. It is written up as a secondary goal of producing affordable housing in the plan, all the different ways to reach safe harbor. We outline how you would do that. I think it's something like adding 15 units on the SHI would give you temporary safe harbor for 2 years, and then developing based on Stantec's analysis, 3.5 acres of land that has affordable housing on it would get you safe harbor through GLAM. So those are ways to reach safe harbor. But really, I think we want to keep in mind that the primary reason for doing this plan is to address housing needs. Are there any other thoughts or questions before we move on? Okay, so you should all be familiar with the goals that we've established for the plan, but just as a reminder, based on all the data and input that we collected in sort of the first phase of this project, we established 4 main goals to expand little to middle housing options. So additional choices for people to facilitate, say, first-time ownership or downsizing for seniors, but basically to have more options as really the primary housing available in town are larger single-family homes. The second goal is to produce affordable housing, uppercase A, meaning that this is required to be affordable, which would also, again, help you reach safe harbor through 40B. Goal 3, to reduce housing instability for seniors and vulnerable households who may be struggling to afford housing in Nahant. As we saw in the data that we gathered, there are many households, both seniors, single persons, and others who are struggling to afford housing in town because it's such an expensive area as well as Greater Boston being such an expensive area. And 4, to make sure that as we're working towards our housing goals, we're harmonizing that with sustainability goals, understanding that climate resiliency and being a coastal community is something that's really important for Nahant. So those are the big primary goals. Should be very familiar with them at this point. Based on that, we proposed 3 sets of strategies that work towards advancing those goals. These were proposed for public input. We had many conversations about them before then, but they were put out at the forum as well as through the survey that just ran for a month. And these are what those strategies are, just to refamiliarize yourself with them. I know that the committee spent a lot of time talking through this based on the write-up of this that we provided last week, which is something, again, we also looked at earlier in the process. But just as a reminder, these are what the strategies are. I also reviewed the minutes from your last meeting, and I just want to focus on a couple questions and thoughts that seem to come up based on those minutes, and just spend a little time making sure that everybody is clear on what these are, because the remainder of the meeting, we're going to focus on what the public had to say about these recommendations. And basically what we want to do is prioritize which ones that we want to keep in the plan. I would expect that a few of these we may propose not including in the final plan because others are higher priority. And we want this to be something that the town can really focus on and realistically work towards implementing. So that's kind of the goal tonight, is to really see which ones are the highest priority that we want to include in the plan. And then once we make that decision, MAPC can provide additional resources and information to flesh out the details of these recommendations. But before we do that, we want to agree on the ones that we want to move forward with. I reviewed the meeting minutes, and I just want to cover a couple things that came up. I saw that there were a lot of questions and conversation about affordable housing trusts. It is basically a best practice for a community to have an affordable housing trust and use a portion of the funds allocated from the Community Preservation Act, or the CPC, and dedicate a portion of those funds to the trust as seed funding, and then to work towards bringing in additional funding into that trust. And so that's essentially what we're recommending here. Based on a 2018 report from the Mass Housing Partnership, over 100 communities in the Commonwealth have an affordable housing trust. We established 6 context communities from our data analysis that have similar characteristics to Nahant. 5 out of 6 of those communities have an affordable housing trust: Essex, Rockport, Ipswich, Marblehead, and Swampscott. So if anyone's interested in seeing how any of those communities have set up their trusts, we can provide links to check that out. And we will also provide a guidebook that Massachusetts Housing Partnership put together that shows how to establish affordable housing trusts and how they are typically structured and governed and operated. Some of the things I think would be good to note for us is that typically a trust will have different members of different committees and boards from a community placed on it. So you might have a representative from the select board, the planning board. You can have the town administrator be a voting member of the board if you would like. You could also bring in, say, the Council on Aging, or I would really recommend having someone from the Housing Authority on the trust. But you can also bring in just folks who have expertise in housing and affordable housing to really help you think about the best way to use funding. So I think everyone's aware 20% of the CPC funds are currently allocated towards affordable housing initiatives in Nahant. So we're proposing to just at that same allocation, put that money into the trust as seed funding, and then look at other ways to bring in funding. That could be grants, that could be donations, that could be fees that you place as a requirement for developing in town. There are a lot of ways to bring funding into that trust. One of the ways is to take a vote and see if you'd like to allocate some general funds into the trust, but that's absolutely not something that you have to do. And it's something that you can decide later and basically vote on. All we're suggesting at this point is to establish that trust and take the existing funds that you have been using for affordable housing and put it into the trust and then work on building funding for that. Are there any questions or clarifications on the trust?
Yes,
Hey,
by
Alex, it's
whom,
Michelle. No, go ahead, Michael.
by whom is action required in order to establish the trust?
It has to be voted on at town meeting.
Okay, and is there any requirement other than in our own bylaws as to what level of vote is required to establish it? What percentage of vote?
I mean, that would be based on your bylaws, so I defer to Mark or Tony.
I think the trust would be a simple majority.
Great, thank you.
Alex, it's Michelle. So you said one idea of funding the trust is through fees. So Mark, I don't know if you know this or not. So for fees that we collect for permitting for building, does that all go towards funding salaries and inspectional services? Or is there a way to determine or make a recommendation or an article at a town meeting to take a percentage of those fees collected and move them into the housing trust?
We could currently, all fees from such measures go into the general fund, and the general fund is appropriated through town meeting vote. So certainly at town meeting, you could appropriate funds to the trust. But again, they go to the general fund at this point.
Okay, that's good. Great.
I think Patty, did you have your hand raised?
No, I did not. I think Lynn does.
I
Right.
do.
Yeah.
Yes, Alex, I might have misheard, but I think you mentioned 20% of CPC money can go to affordable housing. And it's actually a minimum of, the figure is 10%.
10,
And then
okay,
beyond
sorry.
that, yeah,
I
so I just
misspoke.
want to clarify that. And I also think the real estate percentage transfer tax that's under consideration is an interesting point as well as in terms of potential funding source.
Yes, there's some state legislation now that would basically enable municipalities, it's being driven by the city of Boston, but if it passes, any municipality could use it. It would be a way to basically tax large real estate transactions that basically are determined to be speculative and kind of like property flipping, not the kind of thing that you want to see. It happens all the time because, you know, this is just what happens in a high expensive area like this. But basically to take funds from that fee and then allocate it towards other things you'd like to see, affordable housing could be allocated into the trust. Yeah.
Who determines whether a property qualifies for that treatment?
I mean, there's a couple different bills, nothing's passed yet, so the
Okay,
parameters
thanks.
of it aren't laid out yet.
It's under consideration.
Thanks.
Josie has her hand up.
Unmute Josie if she wants to speak.
Okay, I clicked ask to unmute. Can you unmute yourself now, Josie?
Why don't you try again, Alex?
Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. So you did mention a couple of towns in Massachusetts that have trusts for similar type of endeavors. I just have a question for you. Nahant has practically no commercial base whatsoever. It's mostly all residential, unlike places like Swampscott and others. Do you have any information on similarly situated towns, either small demographic like we have, or towns that do not have a commercial base? Because tapping from a general fund is an option, but may not be for small communities like Nahant. So are there other places where funding can be put in? You said grants, but certainly the state of Massachusetts, in a small community like ours with no real commercial base to tax, the burden would be on the taxpayers. So could you please give us some more information for similarly situated towns in the next time that we meet, or if you have it available today? Thanks.
Yeah, well, the Community Preservation Act is basically an existing funding source that we're proposing in this recommendation to put into the trust. It has already been established. other funding sources that you bring into that is entirely up to the town. We haven't written the recommendation to say to pull from the general fund. If that's something that the town of Nahant doesn't want to do, and understanding that Nahant is a unique community that has pretty much a very, very limited commercial base, which is very unique, and doesn't want to bring funds from the general fund, and that's totally the purview of the town. So I think those are the kind of decisions that are made later. And we specifically do not write some of those things into a plan so that those decisions can be made later, because a lot of the recommendations that come from a plan require additional steps and conversation and efforts to actually think about implementing. And we don't want to make a plan that's so rigid that you can't make those types of decisions. I would offer that Essex has a limited commercial tax base, not as limited as Nahant's, but pretty limited and pretty small community on the water, and they do have a trust. So I would suggest maybe looking there first, but some of the others may also just have useful information. We will share those communities as well as a trust guidebook that you can review maybe at your next meeting when we're drafting the report.
Thank you. And any information that you can provide that would show us where maybe small communities are getting the funds would be very helpful. Federal, state.
One of the recommendations is to impose a fee on short-term rentals. That would be funding that you could put into the trust. Jim?
Yeah, when you mentioned providing additional information, I wonder if you could just do that automatically and email links and so forth, so that we would have them rather than wait till the next meeting.
Great idea. Thanks.
Okay,
Alex, so sorry, it's Lynn speaking again. I realize that, towns like this are hard to find, but I'm wondering if the town of Hull, which is also, in the water with limited commercial might be, and has CPA, if they might be analogous. I know you were looking on the North Shore, but Hull is another.
Hull is actually the 6th context community. It's the only one that doesn't have a trust, but I noticed
Okay.
they have a plan recommending that they establish one.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I think the rest of these recommendations are pretty straightforward, and there weren't many questions about them in the meeting minutes from your last meeting. And since we have discussed all of these in depth already, I'm going to move to the next set. So the next set are all regulatory strategies, all require a zoning change, which requires a affirmative vote at town meeting. So another set of recommendations that requires an additional step, public process and public input to vote to approve. But we're at the planning level, higher level, and this is what we're recommending the town pursue and try to pass. It seems like there were questions about all of these. For the accessory dwelling unit bylaw, there were some questions about other similar communities that have zoning regulations that permit accessory dwelling units by right and how they're structured. So we will share a report that documents all existing communities that have ADU regulations, a little bit dated now, but should still have some really great information in it. And there were a handful of communities that had a similar population size to Nahant that had by right bylaws. And so we will share that with you that, again, you could focus on in your meeting that we're not attending, as I think that's a good way to balance your meetings on your own and meetings with us. But Boxborough has a by right ADU bylaw, Littleton, Situate, and Wilmington. Swampscott has an ADU bylaw, but it's by special permit. Same with Ipswich, Manchester by the Sea, and Rockport. But those would be some communities to look at. And in the report that we'll share, you can dig into some of the other ways that has been set up. We also at MAPC have a resource called Living Little, where We share all kinds of different resources and best practices for ADU development. Again, at the beginning stages of proposing these recommendations, we wanted to get a sense of, what we thought we wanted to propose to the public. And now we're trying to get a sense of what we want to include in the final plan. When we get to the final plan, that's when we include all these resources like the Living Little and the guidebook, and we write up some of the details that we want to include. But that's really, something that you do at that point in the process, because first we have to agree on which ones we like. But anyway, there's some resources that we'll share about ADUs, but there are several small communities that have by right ADU zoning that you could look at as examples. And then some of the coastal communities that are context communities for Nahant, such as Swampscott, Ipswich, and Rockport, have ADU regulations, but they function through special permit. If we wanted to recommend that to happen through special permit instead of by right, that's a decision that you could make. I think MAPC really encourages communities to establish a by right process so that it's straightforward and easy, and that you're not charging everyday folks lots of fees to be able to use their property. And with that said, you can establish development standards to make sure that ADUs are built in such a way that it's going to protect neighbors and fit into the built environment of Nahant.
That leaves the enforcement or the interpretation of the provisions in the hands of the building inspector, correct?
If it's by right, then it would just be a site plan, and you'd have to show the building inspector, or if you have a process with a planning board to review site plans, that it meets the requirements you set. What could those requirements possibly be? It could be, ADUs can't be bigger than 900 square feet, or ADUs have to abide by existing setbacks from homes, or ADUs have to be screened with landscaping to make sure that it's difficult to see them for the street, or the property owner has to show that they have a certain amount of parking spaces on their property, so it's not going to affect off-street parking. Things like that are things that you could put in to the bylaw to make sure that you're protecting the kinds of things that you want to protect, but also still offering that straightforward process. If it's by special permit, you could make the special permit granting authority the zoning board of appeals or the planning board, really whatever one you think is best suited to do that. But it will create a more difficult, lengthy process for somebody who wants to do this. And it will require them to pay fees because holding these hearings costs money. So
I was really just asking about the by right provision.
Yeah, by right, depending on how it works, and again, I defer to Mark and Tony, but depending on how it works, you would have a site plan review and then a review with the building inspector.
Alex, it's Michelle. So when you say by right, are you saying that what we would do is adopt the general laws for Massachusetts on ADUs, and then we can overlay those with certain regulations?
Yeah, so I saw there was a question about, this is another thing where there's a bill being taken up by some advocates at the State House, but it has not been voted on or enacted, but there is a bill that I will send you a link to if you're interested in looking at it further. But there is a bill now that they're trying to pass state legislation that would basically make it so that ADUs would be allowed by right in any single family district. So basically, if that bill were to pass, it would mean that your zoning would have to allow ADUs by right. Right now, that is not been voted on or anything. So if you wanted to make ADUs permissible by right, you would have to pass a zoning bylaw. You'd have to draft that bylaw, set the standards that you think are appropriate for Nahant, and it would have to pass a town meeting. And that just requires a simple majority vote. We
Yes,
proposed ADUs
Alex,
based on the, yeah,
I think Josie had her hand up.
sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm very intrigued by the by right and then the overlay. So for example, could we do a combination of by right for owner occupied properties, but by special permit for incorporations or trusts or companies that owned the properties, so that we can control a little bit more of, you know, the neighborhoods and things like that, and what might be done to the structures.
If I'm understanding your comments correctly, you could decide to have certain parts of town permit ADUs by right. And then other parts of town where you think there are some additional conditions and complexities, and you'd like to have special permitting to provide a layer of review, you could do that. You could have an overlay zone that would specify where it has to receive a special permit, and have the rest of the zoning by right.
Yeah, I think I wasn't clear enough. I don't believe that we're looking for areas of zones or targeting zones for special permit versus by right. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's all over Nahant by right if you're owner occupied home.
Yeah.
But if you are a home that you are either a trust or an LLC or a corporation that's taking a home and chopping it up and trying to make, you know, multiple apartments, then you would need to have some sort of a permit. Could we do both?
Yeah, you could.
Thank you.
John, did you ever thought about this?
One
I was gonna say, yeah, I don't see any reason as to why you couldn't do both. It's written into a lot of zoning bylaws for ADUs that at least one of the dwelling units, either the accessory or the principal unit, has to be owner occupied. So I would imagine you could do something exactly like what you're asking. Understand that Alex and I are planners, we're not attorneys, so that's definitely a question for town council to be 100% sure on something like that.
Thank you.
So regarding zoning bylaws, does that require a simple majority or 2/3 to pass?
Simple majority. Used to be 2/3, simple majority now, with housing choice legislation.
Okay.
And then also, we do have a mapping analysis that our data services team has been working on for quite a while. That will provide you with a little information as you pursue thinking about these different factors, and where you would want to have this zoning or maybe an overlay to differentiate different things. We'll share that with you to review in one of your independent meetings. Okay, so they'll allow small to medium-sized housing types in residential districts. This is really working at in the ADU bylaw also, is really looking at that goal to expand different types of homes, since 75% of homes in Nahant are single family. This current zoning regulations only allow single family. So this is not talking about reducing minimum lot sizes, which I think there's a little bit of confusion about based on the meeting minutes. This is basically looking at your existing residential districts and saying that you would also allow 2-family, smaller multifamily, townhouses, other types of homes than just single family. And the reason is, if you allow different types of homes, you're creating opportunities for a broader range of people. Seniors that want to downsize into something smaller are going to find more options to do that. Young folks who want to buy their first home or stay in Nahant are going to do better finding something that would be a condo in a small townhouse or multifamily building, than opposed to a big single family home that, I think the median price is around $1 million for that in Nahant. So this is about creating a greater variety of housing options. It's not proposing to reduce the minimum lot size in the districts. Any other questions or thoughts about that one?
Well, there's a lot of things to be digested here, putting condos aside. And let's say somebody uses space that's not currently used on their lot to build if you will, a small home. That sounds as if it's not going to allow some new family to come in and buy a starter home, because to buy a starter home, you'd have to subdivide the lot to be able to sell them land, in addition to giving them the opportunity to rent in the newly constructed smaller dwelling. Am I missing something there?
I mean, there may be the minimum lot size requirements is basically how that works is like, say the minimum lot size requirement is 30 square feet. It means that if the lot is not 30,000 square feet or larger, then you can't build on it. So yes, if you have a lot of lots that aren't at least 30,000 square feet, I think in the other zone it's 10,000 square feet, which is a really small minimum lot size anyway.
Yeah.
But if something was not that minimum lot size, it was smaller, then you couldn't build on it. But that's kind of done for a reason, because you don't want, an oversized home on a really small piece of property that looks all out of sorts. So basically, like, we're proposing a small change in the type of home that's allowed, but not a bigger change in the properties, like the minimum lot size. So yeah, there might be limited opportunities, but basically what this one's getting at is, if there's an infill opportunity and somebody wants to build a 2-family or a 3-family instead of a single family home, we should allow them to do that, and it benefits the town because it creates more housing options than just a large single family home that tend to be more affordable, that tend to be possibly condos or things that people can rent and afford.
Okay, that sounds like it's a fairly small universe of properties where this sort of thing will be possible, given the way that the town is built out.
Now, one of the things that we think we want to talk about a little bit more, based on some of the comments that we got at the forum and the online open house, is this interest in conversion. So say you have a single family home, you want to convert it to a 2-family or 3-family. That's not permitted right now. We could recommend that as a part of this recommendation. I think it is a great way to create, again, more housing options with minimal impact on the neighborhood. Because, from the outside, you're still just seeing the footprint of a single family home, but it might have a couple different homes in there that could be options for young people or seniors or middle income workers or whoever else. But again, you could have standards to make sure that there's enough parking there or whatever it may be.
Right. Sounds like there's a lot of work to be done to bring that to a workable position to carry out in town. And we don't have time for that now, I get it.
Yeah, a lot of these details are going to be written up in the report, and that'll be the time to really talk through the details of the recommendations.
So
Alex,
well,
hold on one
let
second.
me
Alex?
interrupt you for a second. I'm sorry. The report that you guys are planning to produce in this near-term time frame is going to have specific recommendations on how to achieve these, let's say, small to medium-sized housing additions in light of the concerns that I just identified?
So, as I said earlier, there's a balance to strike where you don't want to be too specific, because these are decisions that the town needs to make later. Like, if this is a recommendation in the plan, it is essentially just saying to the community, to the select board, to the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, that we would like to work on a zoning change that gets us more housing types. Okay, that's all it is. But then you look at this plan, you say, that's a good recommendation for us to focus on this year at this town meeting. And then you draft those regulations, you determine the details that we're kind of getting into now at that time, based on what you think's appropriate, what you think is a good chance of passing a town meeting, but then it has to go and pass a town meeting. We're at a high level right here. We're just identifying things for the town to work towards based on all of the analysis that we've done to date. We can include some guidance on implementation in our recommendations, say, if we think it's really important for, say, the ADU bylaw to be by right in some places and special permit in other places. But, we're not going to write the actual regulations of the ADU bylaw. That's additional process and step. And so a lot of those details are determined when you look at implementing. We're at a high level in a plan like that.
Well, there's not, anybody's lawfully able to propose regulations or actions on town meeting floor, and they can be very, very detailed. They're obviously not necessarily going to be accepted in the detailed form, but it would seem to me that to the extent that we're leaving this in all in sort of nice to have, just generically desirable things to do, we're leaving all the work for the other boards and committees who have pretty full plates, as I understand it. And the question will be, what did we spend so much time on if we're not coming up with some more detailed recommendations to make?
So Michael, it's Michelle. Let me just interject here, and then I want Josie to have her time speak. Remember, this is just a roadmap or a strategy to get us to achieving our housing needs. So we are not going to be able to have all of the detailed answers to bring forth to the residents, for example, at a town meeting. Some of the stuff is going to need to be administered through some of the other boards and committees. And that's just the function of how our government operates. So I'm going to end there. Josie, I want to give you your time because I know you had your hand up to speak.
Yes, so I'm thinking of other communities that I've seen that have allowed certain changes. For example, Newport took a lot of these beautiful mansions that they could not sell and allowed some of changing of zoning laws that did allow for condo conversions and things like that. I also know that Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard also have had these kinds of things. So perhaps as part of the recommendation, if this is something that this committee would like to do, is to provide some information on how other communities did it similarly. That might help inform the public before they make a vote one way or the other. Thanks.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And again, once we agree on the final recommendations, that's when we would bring in resources and guidance to give you examples and support in implementing or thinking about how to implement the recommendations. But we have to get through the first step of which ones do we want to include, which ones do we think, would not be so great for us to focus on, and we don't want to include in the plan. That's the first step before we can go to the next level of detail. The last one was about the 40R smart growth zoning. We can share some additional things that you can read to learn more about this. But essentially, put as simply as possible, it's basically a template for zoning that would allow you to reach compliance with this 3A requirement, which requires Nahant to establish zoning that basically, generally speaking, encourages multifamily development. It's a template that's been around for a long time. The added benefit to Nahant is that if it's adopted, the state will actually award the town funding that can be used for capital improvements near wherever you would put this district. I am going to suggest that we make this decision later when we actually are working on the 3A zoning. But I think it's something to keep in mind that you could use this tool to draft the 3A zoning, and there are added benefits to it, or you could just draft the zoning from scratch. We can determine that later, but I think it's good for it to be on your radar. If people agree with that, we can generalize this recommendation to say, work towards complying with 3A, which, as you know, we are already planning to do, as that'll be the next focus of the committee after the plan is adopted. What is everyone's thoughts on that?
My thought is that we need more detailed information that we can read in preparation for our next meeting when we can discuss it more fully. So you will be sending us more information specifically on that. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll send you that information. And I just want to flag that we don't need to specify this in the plan. We can determine whether we want to use the smart growth overlay for 3A compliance later. So yeah, I will share information so people could just spend some time learning more about it. But it is a very technical thing. So I'm hesitant to provide you details that the state has. I can send it to you, but it is a big chunk of information. It's very much something that kind of a planner needs to look through, but I try to just include the main benefits of it. But again, it's something that we can decide on later. But if it's helpful to you, I can share you the links that the state has on smart growth overlays.
I just want to underline that this committee has been dealing with extremely technical stuff. And we cannot depend just on conversations we have online on these matters. So that if you provide us with more detailed information that we can look at, at our leisure, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, no, we can do that. Absolutely. I take your point. I expect that you want to see more information about these things. I also just want to say that our role really is to look through all the technical information. And the committee's role is really to provide information about Nahant, help with public engagement, guide the process. So like our job is to look through all the technical information. You don't have to look through all of the details. You're not actually sitting down and writing the plan. We're doing all of that. That's what our role is. But we're doing it with your guidance. And I appreciate that you want to see more details about these things to basically be in a better position to discuss them.
Thank you.
I second that sentiment. I'm actually in the devil in the details person myself. So giving us some links would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have flagged ADUs, affordable housing trust, and smart growth districts as ones that we would like to see additional details on. So we will definitely provide that for you. The next set of strategies, and just a quick time check, we have an hour remaining. So I do want to make sure that we can start to get into the actual public input on these things. I was hoping that we could get into that soon. So there were a lot of policy strategies. The first was to adopt an impact fee on short-term rentals. I saw there might have been a little bit of misunderstanding about this at the last meeting. What the town has told us is that the town meeting vote was to cap the number of short-term rentals that are permitted in Nahant. But this recommendation is basically complementary of that, to say that you would assess a fee on short-term rentals, take that money and put it into the housing trust. So that is how it's a little bit different, but really more so complementary to the recent town meeting vote that happened during our planning process.
Well, Alex, Michelle, I think well, I need to go back and look at the warrant. So there were a few things that occurred. One was to cap the rentals at 4%, but there was also a vote on assessing a fee for short-term rentals. So, yeah, let me go back and I'll check that, but I believe we had already voted on that. What's outstanding is the permissibility of non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Owner occupied are permissible.
The selectmen are developing regulations, correct, Mark?
Well, we're waiting to hear from the Attorney General on the review of the bylaw that was passed.
But
And
assuming that's favorable, you will be developing regulations, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, Mark, so
the
our
answer-
understanding was that the vote was really about regulations and not about a fee, but if you could let us know whether there was a vote on the fee, because if there was, then I think this is when we probably should take out and not spend time, collecting all these resources and information about it.
I'll have to revisit it.
Okay, thank
Michelle. I don't recall
yeah.
the fee. Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna go as we're going, I'm gonna go look for it.
Okay.
Okay, so the building codes, I think there was pretty much consensus of support for that, not many questions. It's essentially adopting new specialized codes that just got put out by the state and ensures new developments extremely energy efficient. We care about that because an energy efficient home is going to have lower utility expenses, making it easier for folks to afford their homes here in Nahant. And it's also going to work towards climate goals by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Nahant already has pretty good building codes. I think are adopted in 2018. This is basically looking at just adopting the latest iteration of the codes that just brings them to a higher standard.
But the new building code continues to maintain the existing practice of existing homes being, if you will, grandfathered, and there needing to be a large quantum of new work in order to make the new building code provisions applicable to an existing dwelling, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Great.
The explore expanding the property tax reduction volunteer program. So we understand that there is a program in place. That's where this idea really came from. We are just simply saying, evaluate how impactful that program has been and explore whether it makes sense to expand it to more households. You can see that that's a very high level recommendation. Evaluate the program you have, explore expanding it. The last two, I think could take up a lot of time if we get into the details of them. It seems like people understand them pretty clearly, so I don't want to spend a lot of time right now because we really need to jump into the public input portion of the presentation. But the recommendation here is basically to look at publicly owned sites that we identified in the plan, which John's going to get into later, and look at ways to incentivize and facilitate affordable housing development with public open space that's open to all Nahanters on those sites. The last one concerns the Coast Guard property. Everyone's very familiar with that. And we're eager to share the input we received on that so we can have a conversation about that recommendation. But I don't think anyone's confused about it. So if that's okay, maybe we can move forward into the results of public input.
I only have one question, please.
Sure.
And that's just because I wasn't part of this committee before, so thank you for indulging me. Before we build anything, the one question that I had last time was, could we use public vouchers for affordable housing and try to incentivize folks in other ways to rent for affordable housing? Or does the law require a town to build new housing?
Well, a requirement of the housing production plan is to identify sites where the town would encourage affordable housing. The state has to review and approve the plan. They will not approve it without sites identified.
Okay, so right there. Does the state require new housing to be built for affordable housing? Or does the state law state that as long as there are enough vouchers that can fill the bill? That is very unclear, has been very unclear to me.
The state requires every community to be at 10% affordable housing. Nahant's
But it
around.
does not, but it doesn't require building new units.
It does.
It does.
If you're
Okay.
going to reach safe harbor, you have to build affordable units, either through a small increase for temporary safe harbor, or if you want to go through the GLAM route, you have to have property in town that's actually used for affordable housing. If you're going to expand that property, then there has to be affordable housing there. In terms of the vouchers, there are federal vouchers. Those are called Section 8. There are state vouchers. Basically, this is money that housing organizations provide that helps people pay their rent. It's not something that municipalities offer in exchange for different things. If you were going to say offer a voucher to a property owner and give them a tax reduction, there's no way that reducing their taxes would cover the amount of money they would lose by having to rent at a lower rate. And I'm not aware of any programs like that exist outside of Boston and Somerville, very large communities with lots of money. But they basically offer these vouchers out as money, not in exchange for different things.
And the follow-up to that is, so what I'm hearing is that the state requires actual building of properties. Is that correct?
To get a safe harbor from 40B, you have to build some affordable housing. Yes.
Okay. The second follow-up question, does the state require them to be rental or could they be home ownership?
Either would qualify on the subsidized housing inventory.
Either. So there's no state requirement that rental units be built.
Well,
It could be either, well, hold on, state requirement, not recommendation. I don't want to know recommendations yet. So the state does not require them to be rental units. It can be home ownership.
That's true. I think the
Units.
state incentivizes
Thank you.
rental units, because on
Thank
the
you.
other side, if you have a 40B development where a portion is affordable, a portion is market rate, all of the units would count on the SHI. If it's
There's
ownership,
material,
then just the
there's-
ownership units would count, just the affordable ownership units would count.
there are materials that, that Michelle sent out within the last 2 weeks that were generated by other communities that were dealing with 40B issues. And in those materials, I haven't drilled down to the bottom of it. It states that it is more favorable for communities to develop rental properties in terms of progress toward achieving the safe harbor numbers that would allow us to prevent a hostile 40B. So how exactly that works, I don't pretend to know right now, but it's certainly capable of being found out. So
Yes,
while it
that's-
is an
absolutely
option,
right.
it is an option to go with wholly owned properties that is less favorable to a community like Nahant than it is to use rental properties in terms of more quickly and more easily achieving the safe harbor status under 40B.
This is, it's right, but this is really what it boils down to. If something is built through 40B, either hostile or a friendly 40B that the town chooses to move forward with, if that development is rental and say 25 are affordable units and 50 are market rate, 75 units are going to be added to your SHI. If that development is affordable, then only the 25 affordable units are going to count on your SHI. So if you do a rental 40B development, you get credit for all of the units. If you do an affordable 40B development that's ownership, you only get credit for the affordable units. But this doesn't apply in any other situation. It's just referring to a 40B development.
Okay, well, because my only question, and for clarification, because I think I know the answer. Well, rentals, for the folks that would qualify for rentals, the prioritization, my understanding, would be either the homeless or pregnant women with children. So how would it serve the majority of the Nahant community where home ownership may serve our constituents more? I'm not saying either way. I just wanted to know what the law stated and what the options were. Because it was not clear from the many minutes that I've read. And if I'm legal, right? And if I can't understand that, I'm sure many of the town folks who are voting on these ultimately were not really clear on that either. Thank you.
I really don't understand your question.
Alex, it's Michelle. I think what she's asking is there a mechanism for Nahant residents to get prioritized for an affordable housing project development effort? And my understanding is
Right.
only if there's a build for a developer agreement.
Basically, when affordable housing is built, you can apply to the state to have a percentage of those units be set aside for Nahant residents. The priority will be for seniors and the disabled, and then other Nahant residents. It is on a project by project basis.
And
That's-
does it matter whether it's a rental, build for renting or build for ownership?
No.
No, okay.
So
Wait,
let's use an example, Madam Chairman, just give me, because I think folks really don't understand this. If Nahant allows building of, let's say, affordable home ownership, it's up to the charitable organization to decide who goes in there. They can give priority.
No.
Sure.
If it was a development agreement with a charitable organization and they set aside X percentage of units to prioritize for seniors and then Nahant residents, there would have to be a lottery administered in order for us to see who would get those, be able to get those units.
That's right, Michelle. So you can set aside a certain amount for Nahant seniors and
Yes.
Nahant disabled, and then Nahant residents of any category, and then the remainder is a lottery.
So I would really like you to send us information with that specific language so that we understand that fully, please.
Okay, I can send you information on, it's called local preference. It's not something that really we are doing in a plan. It's something that you would apply for after affordable housing is built if you want to.
It would be helpful for us to understand it.
Sure.
And the people, the rest of the people in town who have yet to gain much of a grasp of this process are going to have questions along those lines. So that we need to be well informed to be able to respond to those.
All right, well, we're going to get into some of the public input now. I think that's a good transition over to all the input that we've gathered from the public. Is it okay if we move on to that?
Yes.
All right, so we gathered public input through our second townwide forum, which was well attended, and we also then followed that up with putting all of that same information up on an interactive, informative survey that we left open for a month. And we had about 60 participants at the forum, and we had about 250 participants at the online open house. It's around 300 total Nahant residents reached, which is roughly 9% of Nahant's population. I think you want to think about that like a sample, so a poll, like if there was an election going on and you see polls come out, it's based on a sample of people. And let me tell you, this is a really good sample. I've done 6 housing production plans at MAPC, and this is one of the most people I've seen engaged in a housing production plan process, which is a testament to you and getting people out, getting the word out, and to Michelle, who really made a great effort to engage folks. So I hope people feel really good about the input that we've collected. I'm going to go into some of the results that we got, but first I want to just share some of the demographics about who we were able to speak to. In terms of the forum, the online open house, demographics don't vary significantly. And interestingly, the results are very similar as well. If anything, there was slightly greater support for our recommendations on the online open house survey. So since there wasn't much variation, we've combined them all here to look at tonight, and we sent that out last week. So hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it, but if not, we're going to go into it all now. So the majority of people that we engaged lived on Big Nahant. Much smaller amount of people lived on Little Nahant. Some people said that they worked or volunteered in Nahant, and then there were a handful of folks who said that they were looking for a home in Nahant that we engaged. Most people own their home, but we did hear from a few renters and then folks who do not own or rent, who I would assume just do not live in Nahant. Household income, the biggest cohort we heard from were folks making 75 to 100,000, which is actually around the median income of Nahant residents. But we did hear from folks above that income, as well as folks who were below that income. So this gives you an idea of the socioeconomic status of the participants. In terms of race and ethnicity, majority of participants were white in both the forum and online open house. And then here's the first round of results that we got. So those programming and capacity strategies are written here in this chart in shorthand. We just spent a lot of time talking through them all, but they're here to reference in shorthand. And then this chart is showing in the white numbers the total number of people who voted for very supportive, neutral, or opposed. And then you can see it's laid out on a percent chart. So you can also see the percent of total people who voted for that option. So in our capacity and programming set, the most popular were to promote first-time home buying programs offered by the state, and to promote housing stability and aging in place programs offered by the state. You can see that over 70% of folks were very supportive or supportive of that. A small percent was just neutral. And then the remaining folks said that they were opposed to doing that. This is really strong support. I think those recommendations are really no-brainers. These are existing programs that we're simply saying use the town's platform to promote those. And we can provide all of those programs in the plan that you could then take and list on a website or promote in other ways. The other recommendations were a little more mixed results. The hire a part-time planner, I would say is pretty much a neutral thing. You have a little bit of over 40% that were opposed, but then close to 60% that were very supportive, or neutral. There was 20% very supportive, 10% that were supportive, so about 30% very supportive, but then a big chunk of folks that were neutral. This kind of tells me that it's not opposed by the majority of residents, but it's not clearly one of the most popular ones either. And then for the Affordable Housing Trust, you see a little bit more support for that. Close to 40% were very supportive or supportive. And then you had 10% that just said neutral, and then you a little over 60% that were opposed. We, in our conversations and comments that we collected, noticed that some folks were not really clear on how it would work, which is something we've talked about tonight. There was some confusion about how transparent it would be. So I think, if this is a recommendation we want to keep in the plan, we would really want to make sure that we're writing out clearly how it would work, that it is transparent, that it is a best practice that over 100 communities in the Commonwealth have, but mixed results through engagement on that one as well. I'm going to go through the other set of strategies and then we'll talk about it all. The next set are the regulatory strategies. We have the ADU recommendation, we have the allowing small to middle housing types in residential districts recommendation, and then the smart growth 40R to comply with the 3A law, which again, I'm recommending that maybe we do not discuss in the plan, but determine later when we're focusing on 3A because it's highly technical. Really difficult for any member of the public to just understand that. But ADUs, I think were clearly supported. It was the most popular of any of these recommendations. You have close to 60% that are very supportive or supportive, then a good chunk that were neutral, and then some opposed as well. But this was clearly the most popular zoning recommendation. If you wanted to pick one thing to focus on for zoning when the plan is done and you move forward to implementation, I'd recommend to focus on ADUs. Not only was it really popular for public opinion, but the data that we've shown, a need for seniors to downsize, a need for young people to find housing options, and then also the fact and all the data we gathered from the assessor to show that a lot of ADUs already exist. They're just not permitted by zoning, but that also indicates that a lot of people want to be able to do ADUs. So making them legal would reconcile that and allow other people to do it as well. I would say that there was some support for allowing other housing types in other residential districts as well, but definitely not as clear of a support for that one as the ADUs. Then our policy strategies. So adopting an impact fee on short-term rentals, clearly very popular. 70% were very supportive or supportive. Adopt the new state building codes. Over 60% were very supportive or supportive. That one, I would definitely say has the support. Explore expanding the property tax reduction program. Same thing. Looks like people support doing that. Then the last two there. So we've got the recommendation, which was written up and proposed to basically, based on last town meeting vote for the Coast Guard site, sell enough properties to pay off the loan to the federal government. Once the loan's paid off, use the remainder of properties for affordable housing, provide a right to return for residents displaced from the site. This was one that I would say people fell on a fence. At the forum, you had some people who were adamant that it should be used for affordable housing, felt strongly about it. You had almost an equal amount of people who are adamant that we need to move on and the priority is to just sell off the loan. Don't want to think about affordable housing on there. That's what I saw from the forum. When we combine everything with the online open house, you have just slightly over 50% of respondents very supportive of this recommendation. But then you have a handful of neutral folks, and then just under 40% who are opposed. When we look at the recommendation, that's a little bit similar, which is to use other publicly owned sites that we identify in the plan for affordable housing and townwide public open space, is actually not quite as much support, but not quite as much opposition either. My interpretation of this is basically that these recommendations are the Coast Guard recommendation is a divisive issue. I think everyone here knows that. There's about half the town from our sample that's supportive of it, and about 40% who are opposed. And it's just something that, you know, we can recommend and look at further, but that's something for us to discuss, I think, tonight.
Pardon me, maybe I misunderstood something you said earlier, but the numbers don't seem to add up when you take a look at the Coast Guard housing site. You know, you've got well over 100% in the totals.
So this is 100% stacked bar chart. So you can see the different colored bars fall on to the line here. So let's see, sorry, I'm using my laser pointer. So this very supportive bar, it's the dark green. You can see it goes from 0 to almost 30%. So that's about 30% of respondents wrote very supportive for that. The number is the total actual people that voted for that. It can be a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that the figures in the bars were percentages.
No, then we put, I could see how that could get confusing. We tried to clarify with the note here, but the white numbers in the bars is the count. That's how many people voted for that. The bars show you in relationship to each other about the percentage of votes for each option.
Right.
So Michael, in that example, if you just total the numbers, it's 130, do 37% of that, and it's 27%.
Right.
Okay.
So generally speaking, there was no recommendation that was opposed by the majority of the public. The most popular recommendations were promoting the first-time home buying and aging in place programs offered by the state, ADUs, a fee on short-term rentals. There was clear support for the new state building codes and expanding the property tax for seniors. Based on the polls and comments, I think the Coast Guard site is a divisive one, but we do not see the majority of the public opposing our recommendation. And the others are also kind of in that place where it's a little bit of a mixed bag. The least supported ones are to hire a part-time planner. The Affordable Housing Trust, you know, the majority are not opposed, but it's hard to say it's popular. But anyway, we have to consider that public input is one of the things that we weigh when we're making our recommendation. But we also want to look at all of the work that we've done to date in terms of collecting the data, in terms of all of the conversations we've had and things that you've shared throughout this roughly 10-month process, and different other factors. So we're going to show you a chart that categorizes all of that to kind of help us weigh the public input and other factors. So I'll get there, but I first just want to see if there are any questions about the public input.
You know, none of these statistics surprise me. If I would have guessed prior to seeing these numbers, I would have guessed right along those lines. I think the housing trust is something that needs further explanation. I think it's a hard concept and it's technical to a degree for people at a 1 hour public forum to grasp. But I think all of the other numbers, I think, reflective of what I would, I think, are true.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So when we're ranking the strategies, we want to consider that public input. It's a big component. This is a public process. We want to do things that we hear from residents. We also want to consider all of that data that we spent so much time collecting. That's one of the primary components of this plan. We did this big housing needs assessment. That was the focus of the first forum. Just to quickly recap that, one of the big key findings was you have an increase in seniors, and you have a decrease in younger folks. The increase in seniors could suggest that you need to focus on creating downsizing options or helping seniors who want to stay in their home be able to do that. You have different kinds of physical limitations as you age. So as a town, you want to think about how to support people when they get to different stages of life. And then for younger folks, I think one of the big findings is we saw this big decline in the 22 to 29 age demographic. For whatever reason that may be, it means that a lot of people who grew up in Nahant aren't staying. That could also be because it's really hard to buy a home here. The median price of a single family home, which is 75% of the housing stock, is close to $1 million. So you need different options for older folks, young folks, and everyone in between. The other one just shows the housing stock is primarily single family homes, 73%, 77% are owner occupied. Many of them are big, have 3 bedrooms or more. So that's really good for families. But what about those who live alone? What about seniors, younger folks, people with roommates, blue collar workers? The more housing types you have, the more people that you can accommodate. A lot of people are struggling to afford housing in Nahant. 45% of renters are cost burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. 6% of owners are cost burdened. So some information there about people struggling to afford housing in Nahant. With that, we see that 645 households are eligible for affordable housing in Nahant. For those 645 households, there's only 48 affordable housing units. So there's a big need for also affordable housing. Why would that be? You can make a pretty good amount of money and be eligible for affordable housing. As an individual, if you make 80% of the area median income in Greater Boston, which is 140,000, which comes down to 78,000. If you make that as an individual, you're eligible. It varies by household size. If you're a 2-person household, 3-person or 4-person household, it goes up. But essentially, 645 out of 1,600 total households in Nahant are at that 80% AMI or lower, which are all the red shaded colored bars here. That's 645 households. It's 40% of households in town. There's a big need for affordable housing in Nahant. So those are the things that we learned in our data analysis. Then we spent all this other time having conversations together and working with the public to see what they thought about all of this. So those are the things that we're considering in these recommendations. Now, this chart is basically showing all of the 12 recommendations. And again, we want to boil this list down to fewer than 12. We want to eliminate some of these because we want the town to have the best ones to focus on and concentrate efforts on. But these were all the ones that were proposed. This section of the chart is weighting how much impact the strategy has on advancing one of our 4 goals: the creating little to middle housing options, creating affordable housing options, stabilizing housing costs, or harmonizing housing needs with sustainability. It's weighted 1 to 3. If it has a 1, it has a little bit of impact on that goal. If it's weighted a 3, it has a big impact on that goal. If it doesn't have a score, it's neutral. If it's negative, then it has a negative impact on that goal. In addition to the 4 goals, which is this part of the chart, we have also considered some other things: public input, which we just reviewed, how feasible it would be to implement the recommendation, and then if the recommendation costs money, it would be difficult to recommend because of cost. So I'm going to go through one, for example, to explain this. The Affordable Housing Trust does not really have to do with little to middle housing options, but it would be huge for affordable housing. It would be huge for establishing programs, promoting programs to stabilize housing costs. So it gets a 3 on those goals. It's neutral on sustainability. It doesn't really relate to that. Public input wasn't strong, but almost half were supportive and then others were neutral. So it got a 1 on public support. Feasible, it's fairly feasible to do it because, as you can see, a lot of communities have done it before, but it does require a town meeting vote. So it got a 1, not higher, on feasibility. Cost, it is the only recommendation that could potentially ask the town to put money into, although the way we have written it is just to take existing CPC funds and put it in there and then look at other ways to generate funding. But it did get a -1 because you might be looking at putting other funding sources in there. So its total score is 7. We did this for all the recommendations. The part-time planner added up to 4. It was the lowest one. The stability programs added up to 12. First-time home buying program was the highest at 14. ADU bylaws was the second highest after that at 9. Little to middle housing, 6. The smart growth overlay, 5. The Coast Guard site, 6. Using publicly owned sites for affordable housing, 8. Expand the property tax program, explore expanding it, 5. New state building codes, 8. Short-term rental impact fees, 7. So I put this together so that we could try and consider all of these things. How well does the strategy advance our goals? What are the implementation considerations? How well is it supported from what we know through our engagement? How feasible is it? Is it costly? And then we added all those scores up to get a sense of where things fall. And with that, I want to just open it up to a conversation about, is there a strategy that you think, based on this information and all of our work to date, that we can take out? You know, it's clearly not something that's supported or easy to implement, and we want to prioritize the other strategies. Let's start there. Does anyone think that there's a recommendation that we want to remove?
Hey, it's Michelle. So I think the part-time shared planner right now, just given the scoring on it in earlier discussions, is probably something we can remove.
Does everyone
Also,
agree with that?
yes.
Agree with
Aye.
that.
Aye.
Okay,
I
The other one,
suggest- Go
Mike,
ahead.
I'm gonna finish. The other one, I would say expand property tax reduction, or we already have an abatement program in place, and we have a work program also for veterans. We can put that on, you know, keep it lower on the list. We can always come back to it, like just want to really focus on the, you know, the ones that we can really, you know, make progress on.
I would agree with
I
that.
also, I would suggest that the short-term rental impact fee is arguably not something that we ought to get involved in, because everything is up in the air with the state's processing and dependency of the regulations, and that will probably take care of itself.
what do others agree with that on the short-term rentals?
Aye.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
okay with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
So. So.
Others?
I would say that the Coast Guard rental, there's already been a vote on that, on what was going to happen with that property. I think we should eliminate it from our discussions at this point. And if someone wants to bring it up at a town meeting for a different vote, but I think it should be taken off the list for this committee.
I'm gonna respectfully disagree with that. The Coast Guard site was the centerpiece of Nahant's application to apply to work with MAPC on this plan. It is extremely relevant to meeting housing needs, extremely relevant to Chapter 40B, extremely relevant to 3A. There is not a consensus of public opinion to say that they're opposed to this recommendation. It is a critical public asset that we need to have an opinion on in this plan.
I would
And
agree.
I-
with the
I
supplement
would
on it.
agree.
Um,
I agree.
I would agree with that also.
Also, Josie, the town meeting vote simply authorized the selectmen to sell it. Didn't
Right, but I think that there's
require
other
them
sites, I believe that
do
there's other
that.
sites that haven't been fully
And there's another
explored.
town meeting vote coming up
Yeah.
to provide funding.
Yeah, I believe that there's a lot of other sites that can be explored and
Well,
haven't.
that may be, but that doesn't mean
Right,
So maybe when
That's
we
just
get
my
further-
opinion.
we should add them to the list of sites to be explored. That doesn't, sorry,
I was gonna say,
I think
we
we're
probably
cutting
will
out
get into
here.
that discussion later on, once we compare and contrast those other sites. And so the position on this one may change or get altered. Oh, the little to middle zoning, do we think that is gonna be just too cumbersome?
I have
I-
started
for-
to get the sense of that, and that it may be better for the town to focus on one zoning regulation, which would be based on the scoring here, the ADU.
Right, that's what I'm thinking as well.
But
So if
as
I
a-
had to pick
but
which
part of
one, I
that-
would pick ADUs.
I suggest that there's, it's very difficult for anyone, in particular town members, to distinguish between the nuances of the ADUs and the little to middle zoning. So it may be better to come up with a common term to address both of them, because it's going to be very difficult to help people understand the difference between the two in terms of overall land use planning process.
Well, I think what we're trying to do, Michael, is kick out the ones that are not as achievable as others. So I'm saying this one is probably one that would require a little bit more work, and we should just deprioritize it and focus on the ones that we can, believe that we can accomplish.
I think that's a good approach. We can prioritize the ADU bylaw. We'll write up some more information on the little to middle zoning, and if the committee wants to strike it, once it's drafted in the report, we can strike it at that time. Does that sound good?
Mhm.
Would
Yep.
would you be getting, when you write that up, would you be sending it to the individual committee members prior to the next meeting?
Yeah, when we draft the report, we're going to give it to you at least a week in advance, probably 2 weeks in advance.
This is Lynn speaking. I'm raising my hand so Pat O'Reilly can be
Unmuted.
entered. Yeah,
Yeah,
unmute.
I don't have
Is he-
that. Yeah,
Oh.
Alex, you have.
Alex,
your
can you
stuff
do that?
all.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, Pat. All right, I hit the button to unmute. All right.
Thank you. It's a little bit late, but what's the why are we calling out the Coast Guard site separately from the public sites? I mean, to me, it doesn't, I'm not really opposed to doing that, but it just seems like, it's another publicly owned piece of land, among other publicly owned pieces of land that we're looking at. Is there a particular strategy for that isn't applicable to other publicly owned pieces of land in town?
Yeah, I think the reason it needs to be a separate recommendation is because there's so many complexities and other factors associated with it. There's been a town meeting vote to sell,
To authorize the sell.
authorize selling the site, and so it's just, there's specific circumstances of that site.
I think, and more importantly, it's the whole bonding issue that's related to that site too.
Yeah, the loan and, yeah.
But are we going to be spelling out any of that in the strategy, or is it just, I mean, to me, it would be, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, but it seems like, because I think it'll be on the map of sites, but in terms of the strategy, are we going to be
Yeah.
spelling out a different strategy?
It's a good question. So there's two main things in the strategy that differ for that. For one thing, it is to say, once you've sold enough market rate properties from the site to pay off the loan, then you would use the remainder for affordable housing. So that's a different thing. It would have to be voted on at a town meeting. And then we are also saying that folks who are displaced from the site would have the first opportunity to live in a new affordable unit there. So that's a right to return. So that's the abbreviation there, AH for affordable housing and RTR for right to return.
Okay.
That also is dependent on the composition of what's developed at that site.
Right, if it doesn't end up being sold for affordable housing like we're recommending, then there wouldn't be the ability to provide right to return.
Well, from what I understand, you just said that once, and Mark, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. Once we get the enough money to pay off that loan, if we got that money from, say, 6 of the sites, then the selectmen would have the power to make a decision not to sell the rest of it. Would that be right?
Well, the selectmen have that right now, not to sell any of them.
Right.
But I think what I heard from town meeting as a member of the Board of Selectmen was that the driving force here is to pay off this loan.
Right, and I entirely agree with that.
Yeah, but I think we tried to strike the balance there.
Yep.
Okay, so just to summarize, because then we need to get in the other big conversation, which is about sites and all of that. We're gonna remove the part-time planner. We're gonna remove or at least treat the expand property tax reduction as a lower priority. We're going to remove short-term rental impact fee. And we're gonna treat little to middle zoning recommendations as a lower priority than the ADUs and potentially strike it at the time that we draft the recommendations. Is everyone in agreement with that approach?
I'm in agreement.
I think so. Let me just raise this. When you come up with that draft plan, I wonder if you could send that out, give us a chance to respond to that, and then take our recommendations and opinions into account when you submit a more final draft.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Jim. We might have to lengthen our timeline a little bit, but to make the room for that, but I think we have the room to do it and we can do that.
Great.
And I would remind members of the committee that once these draft reports go out, it is important that you review them and provide feedback timely, so we don't delay the timeline, because we need to get this into the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board so we can close this out and get it to the state on time.
We are shooting for the week of October 16th or October 22nd, I think, if I recall correctly, for the adoption meeting. If that's set back a week or 2 weeks, that's fine, but it can't be set back much more than that.
Yeah, my challenge is that the Planning Board meets on a monthly basis, so we want to get this in as soon as possible to them so they can review it as well.
Yeah, and just on that note, this report is going to include everything that we've done to date. It's going to have the housing needs assessment. It's going to have the constraints analysis mapping. It's going to have all the information. It's going to have the summary of public input. These are things that we've done throughout the whole process. It'll all be in that report, but the main thing for us to focus on is the recommendations, because the other things we've kind of already reviewed and looked through. All right, so we only have about 15 minutes left. I have a hard stop at 8:30, but I believe John can stay to continue discussing sites with you. Would you all be open to staying past 8:30 to keep the conversation going? Because the next part of this is to look at the input on sites.
I can stay. I can't,
I can stay.
we can
Okay.
have a quorum. Okay,
I unfortunately have a baby I have to put to sleep, so I'm gonna have to go at 8, but John is gonna stay for the site conversation, which is definitely John's wheelhouse anyway.
Okay.
With that, I'm gonna hand it over to John.
okay.
Oh.
So
maybe-
John, you're host, correct?
Am I the host now?
I see, I'm still viewing Alex's screen.
I will make you the host if you're
You
not.
need to make him the host.
Yeah, please do. Then I'll go ahead and set my screen share.
Okay. Do you, okay, you want to share the screen so you can flip through the slide, John? Okay.
Yeah.
So let me find you. I'll make you the co-host. Okay, you should be the host now.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody can see the screen here. And what we're going to do is go right into this conversation about the priority sites and the 3A study areas. So to frame the conversation a little bit, we got some general takeaways that I want to discuss first. And I'm going to ask everybody to just kind of keep your thoughts and your questions until we hit the point in a little bit where we start talking about it and have things for open discussion. So the general takeaways is we saw a lot of really strong support for the site at 50 Greystone, the former cemetery expansion site, support for the Coast Guard site, the support that's the Ward Road, formerly known as the Fox Road site, and the Country Club site. The public generally doesn't support development in flood zones at all. We had a lot of feedback that was very negative about that. The Spring Road and Flash Road sites were not supported for development, nor was anything near the Wharf Street area in the southeast part of town. The church site is something that's controversial, and support for the 3A in the Nahant plus Spring Road area, Coast Guard site, and Edge Hill Apartments / Country Club site. We saw some support for that, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. What I'm asking you all to do is take a look at this, and there are all the different sites that we've talked about throughout this entire process, and the numbers that are on here are the number of either pins that were put into the maps during the in-person forum, or positive comments that were received on the sites during the online open house, the social pinpoint activity. And what I want you guys to really take a look at is you see what we talked about before: the Greystone site, the Coast Guard site, and the Country Club site are all showing up on here with the most support out of any other sites that we took a look at. And we're talking about individual groups of parcels that we think could be something a little bit different, a little bit better to meet the housing need right now. These are good areas to grow the housing stock and this capital A deed restricted affordable housing. And whatever actually happens on these sites is going to be entirely up to public input, town input, whoever is going to be in charge. That's not what we're saying right now. So we're not saying that there's going to be a specific type of development happening somewhere. We're not suggesting that the town acquire any sites that are privately owned. We're not asking that there be any kinds of conversations around mandates or eminent domain or anything like that. It's just a roadmap that says if development is going to happen, if we need to identify some places that would make sense, these are the places that kind of make sense. Of course, the market's going to do what the market does. Incentives are going to do what they need to do, things like that. So with that in mind, here are the sites that we didn't see a whole lot of support on, and some stuff that was a little bit more challenging because of the feedback that we got. So we talked about Flash Road and Spring Road. We can see there are arrows that are kind of pointing to these sites so you can see them. So Spring Road, where my cursor is here, Flash Road down here, as well as the Housing Authority South property, which is right where this arrow is pointing. It's not outlined, but it's right there. We heard that there was a lot of concern from neighbors with doing any kind of development there. And we also heard some concerns about areas that are impacted by coastal waters and potential other sea level issues. That includes the Wharf Street kind of area that we were looking at over here on the east, that impacts the Bayside area and the Knights of Columbus area over here on the west, and that impacts the Bass Point area to the southwest. Bass Point, you can see it has the layer for the flood zone layer in addition to the high coastal area risk. So this map is a little bit of a modified version of the one that we looked at before when we were talking about development constraints, and recognizing that there are some things that may make it difficult or impossible to build there. And all the feedback that we got from the public says if there is any kind of risk for flooding or things being a concern for nearby properties as a result of development, they are the sorts of things that we should not be looking at. So because of that, it takes us to this map right here, where we've gone ahead and outlined in blue. I know it's kind of the same color as the water. We're not suggesting that these things go underwater. Just to highlight how they look, that out of all the sites that we looked at before, narrow them down just to these handful that really make more sense to take a look at. The Ward Road site, the 50 Greystone site, the Country Club site, and the Coast Guard site. We're also recommending including the Housing Authority South site here, even though it's on a floodplain. There's already development that's happening here. And the feedback that we got from the public was, they're not really a big fan of the way that this property looks. They would like to see it redeveloped into something a little bit newer, something that was a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And they would be okay if there was a way to squeeze a couple additional units into the proposed redevelopment there. But realistically, as long as we're not expanding things and building large multifamily or adding more buildings realistically than what's already there, people seem okay with that. And we're not going to recommend that the housing authority find other property to buy and sell this one because it's in a floodplain. It's already there. So it's a question of what's the most we can do with it that it's in existence. So that's what we're taking a look at. And that's why we're recommending that site, even though it is in the floodplain like we discussed. One of the more controversial sites is the St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church, and there was no general agreement from the community on this site. Some residents saw it as a potentially promising development location, and we had a lot of actually really careful comments kind of weighing the backs and forths between declining congregations and land use and things like that. And there were other people that felt like religious institutions should not be considered at all while they're still in active use. And something that may not have been clear to folks is that the church had approached the town about potentially having housing built on some of the vacant land owned by the church. And we can see in this map down here, this just comes from Google, that there's the building footprints are where they are, and there's a decent chunk of land that's a little bit underutilized right here. So there is the possibility to do something at this site that wouldn't involve the demolition or removal of any of the existing structures, including the church. So whether or not that would change some people's minds, I'm not sure. Mike, what's up?
Can you clarify the land area that the church people approach the town about? I'm not having a good sense of where are they talking about retiring the dwelling as opposed to the church edifice itself?
I don't know the exact details of the conversation. Michelle or Tony, maybe there's something more you guys can provide input on, but I'm taking a look at this map right here. This might show a picture a little bit clearer. My understanding was that they'd approached the town about potentially building some housing units on some of the vacant land that's already there, that they're either don't have utilized or have utilized for parking or something like that. Can anybody else add any details there that I may not know?
I'll jump in, John.
Thank you, Mark.
So the Archdiocese property includes, as we know, the church, the parking lot, the dwelling that is there, and the driveway that goes out to Pond Street. There has been some discussion a while ago about the dwelling, some of the property, going out to Pond Street, and perhaps some of the area of the parking lot area.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
So with that in mind, this is a place that we didn't include on here. This is somewhere where we're saying, this probably just needs to be a decision made by the committee as to whether or not we make this a recommended site. With that in mind, we're going to come back to this discussion in just a second, but talking about how the 3A sites look. These are all the potential proposed 3A study areas that were given to the public, both at the online open house and in person. And we gave these circles, ellipses that are really just saying, generally speaking, in this area, would it make sense to build some kind of multifamily here? And balance that out with all the other concerns that people have, density and congestion and road use and things like that. So most of the input was on the HPP sites, not the 3A study areas, which I think makes sense. We're only kind of starting to get into more of a discussion with the public on 3A. And several publicly supported HPP sites are really close to the 3A study areas. So that indicates that there's a real interest in expanding housing options around there, even if not necessarily on that parcel. There's a lot of support to see the country club developed. We saw a lot of comments that people would like to see some of that open space that we are taking a look at there. And support for 3A zoning near Nahant and Spring Roads. We saw a lot of support that said, especially if we can do some kind of mixed use in this area, that would be nice. And we got some clarification from the state today that we should be able to make that work. And again, like we said before, no flood support for floodplain development. And understand that we are at this point just kind of having a conversation about where to have a starting point for 3A discussion. We're not finalizing anything for right now. What our recommendations are as far as kind of moving things forward, what the next steps should look like, is we kind of see these Nahant Road and Greystone Road, Spring Road intersections, this whole little corridor here being a good spot. So even though it's two circles on the map, they're pretty close to each other. We think this would make sense as kind of being one area to study by itself. The Coast Guard site area makes sense as a site to study by itself. And near the Edge Hill Apartments, there's already, I think they're condos. We have them labeled on here as apartments. Even though there's existing density there, it's very, very close. It's within just a couple of feet realistically of the country club site, where we saw a lot of support as well. So we think that could make a good area to make a case for doing some potential 3A work there as well. These are not sites that we need to finalize, come to a consensus on, come to a discussion on here. So just kind of keep this in mind. If we have comments on this, we can certainly talk through this tonight, but it's going to be part of a larger conversation moving forward. What we do need to have consensus on tonight is looking at this map right here and seeing where we have our identified sites that we're making recommendations to you all on. Do you like this? Are you comfortable with this? Is this something that you would support moving forward? And these would be in the final housing production plan, the identified sites. We've mentioned them kind of off and on throughout how things have gone in our conversation today, saying if there's going to be housing development, affordable housing development, these are sites that we've identified where it really kind of makes sense to do so. So number one, do we want to have any changes to the 5 sites that are selected on here? If so, what should they be? And then number two, what do we do about this church site? So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you all for discussion, and whoever has comments or thoughts, I'm happy to hear them.
So it's Michelle. I think we should take 3 off. And I think if there's a way to, re-engage the conversation with the Archdiocese on the church, where that portion is subdivided and something can happen over there, I think that would be a great alternative.
John, could we go through an exercise similar to the strategy exercise where we weighed the sites? We took a look at, some of the issues surrounding each one of them. For example, are they publicly owned? Are they not publicly owned? And because that's gonna weigh, I think, pretty heavily on what's realistic and what's not.
Yeah, so that'll be something that if we move forward in choosing these sites, we'll have them kind of laid out and have a little bit of information about each one in the plan and talk through, this is some of the benefits, these are some of the drawbacks, things like that. From our perspective, it really doesn't matter if the sites are public or private. We're just identifying it as a place where something could happen. And realistically, because we're not talking about eminent domain and we're not talking about anything related to a mandate for anybody, we're just identifying this stuff. And in housing production plans, public sites, private sites, they're identified somewhat equally, because some municipalities hold more land than others. So for some, you're going to see a lot of private, some you're going to see a lot of public, some a little bit more in between. So we will make sure that we communicate that to the public, and we'll make sure that that's something that's really laid out when we have more detailed discussions of each one of these. However, at this point, it doesn't make sense to go through and do all that work for things until we've kind of decided on what the sites are going to be. And if we hit the point where after a little bit more information is received, or maybe new information comes to light, or there was something that folks didn't know, and once they look at it in writing, say, you know what, based on this, I don't think that we should include this in here for reasons X, Y, and Z. But realistically, for right now, we want to see, does it make sense to move forward? I'm putting together some more detailed thoughts and saying that these are the sites that we really like based on public opinion and the experts that we have here.
Yeah, the
I
only
just
one,
have one question,
go ahead, Joseph.
if I may, to the committee. Have public buildings been explored as options? These seems like they're brand new developments. I mean, we already have a public building that could be expanded. We also have a community center that potentially could be flipped into multiple apartments without enormous amount of money. I'm looking at, has the committee looked at options using existing buildings or building off existing buildings that would be cheaper than ground zero building sites? Because I'd like to recommend those two as options, because I believe it will be more economical than building from scratch.
So which buildings are you thinking about, Josie?
Well, there are plenty of buildings, but two that I think, would be, yes, you would need to move a few things, but it could be done. We have a community center that used to be a school that could easily be converted into multiple apartments. And the structure is already there. We have, the area where we currently have affordable housing, and a police station could be moved and you could just build off that building. It would be cheaper than building from zero, especially, if the public does not want to contribute to these projects.
Okay, so on the
But the
second
committee
one that you mentioned, Greystone Road backs up to the Spindrift.
Right.
And so we could connect Greystone Road and the Spindrift together.
Okay. Because I
And-
think, again, building off of current buildings has been, in my experience with other communities, the more affordable route. That's all I just want to bring for your consideration.
So in the community center, we have tenants. We have the Nahant Historical Society. And I think it would be residents that would be very passionate about making a change there. And we would have to think about where would we relocate the tenants in the Nahant Historical Society.
Right, but it could be done. So I'd like to bring that forward as a potential site for public discussion as well.
I think it's a good point, Josie. In the other area, John, I think we are missing is similar to the Spring Road, the Housing Authority property is on Emerald Road. There is a section there that's similar to the Spring Road site.
Just a little further down to the right.
To the right of where your cursor is now.
Keep going, go down, right there.
Yep.
Back.
Right
Yeah.
here,
Let's go a little bit more to the left.
right here.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll take a look at these. We'll see kind of how they look compared to the constraints and stuff like that. And we'll send out some thoughts to you guys that you can go ahead and respond to.
Yeah, can I just give a little feedback too? I think just echoing what was just said about expanding existing structures. I see that the 22 is that properly labeled? There 22 there doesn't include the existing affordable, the Spindrift or the Great Own Road
That's
property.
correct.
So
Yeah,
I think maybe
this is just the vacant property that we have here, and then we have the other area that's the existing Housing Authority North properties as part of the potential 3A study areas. We're not targeting them for development or redevelopment, just because there's already existing affordable housing in that location. And the state will see it as a little bit of a cop out if we just identify areas where there's only existing affordable housing and do it. We could get away with maybe one, and maybe since we're getting rid of the one on the south, it could make sense to just kind of expand it and include this whole block. So we can take a look at that as well.
yeah, does that limit us in terms of funding opportunities going forward for expansion? Because I mean, I would think that would be an obvious solution too, to expand.
Yeah, and we'd also recommended this little, for whatever reason, there's this little donut hole parcel in here that's cut out, be included as part of that as well. And I couldn't tell you as to why that happened, but we'll take a look at it. We could say that this whole area would make sense as a place to just have targeted affordable housing development for sure.
That's where the cell tower is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So maybe we would have to build around it depending on what their terms look like and if they're interested in getting out of it or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
So also, so why I think it's been mentioned the commercial, the business areas. We've got some mixed use areas there. Why wouldn't we just include that entire district as an opportunity area?
because we're not identifying opportunity areas on this map, we're identifying opportunity parcels. The opportunity areas would come from here. And when you identify a site here, it's a way of telling developers, potential developers, whoever is going to be handling things in the town, select board, town administrator, et cetera, that we really want to see housing development happen here. So if we identify mixed use on this map for housing sites, it says we don't like the mixed use that's there, we'd rather see housing there. And somebody that wanted to do a hostile 40B could use that against the town and eliminate some of the businesses that are existing there. So that's why we think it makes more sense to have it as a potential 3A overlay area, especially since we literally found out this afternoon that we'll be able to do mixed use mandates as part of 3A. So that would allow us to be able to keep that stuff there as well. And that's why that's not included.
I guess the question is, should it be included? To give the town folks options. What's the downside? The businesses are going to stay there. I mean, let's be honest. There's very little business.
If the businesses are going to stay there and there's no chance that those sites are going to be redeveloped, that is a very strong argument to not include them.
Well, I don't know that we,
Oh,
I
about
don't know that
that.
we know the ownership of those properties. That could be in some single private owner's hands who would sell out for a price and do away with the businesses.
True.
That's a good point, Mike and Josie. As I know that there is one property owner that owns probably over 50% of those businesses. That property owner could decide on a 40B if they want it. So it's worth considering.
Yeah, especially if we're just providing, options and not making decisions. I think all options that are viable will give the town something to think about and not feel like they're targeting just a few things. I think 5 to 6 options might be helpful.
I think it's more relevant with the new news, John, that you're bringing to light tonight with having a mixed use development being acceptable by the state. It makes more sense.
And it would
Well, I'm
make more
sorry, I
sense to
thought-
have that conversation with 3A. This is just a conversation about housing stuff. So
Okay.
we've already given the public, Josie, all of these different options that are here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Right,
6,
but
7, 8,
we
9, 10
put forward
sites.
we put forward 2 new ones. And I don't think that we should limit providing options. I think there's 2 or 3 more that need to be presented. That's my
Well-
opinion. It's up to the group. I mean, I gotta tell you, I didn't hear very good feedback at that meeting. So if we added a couple of more, at least they would know that this committee is committed to providing them options. And I think that's huge for the public to know this committee is providing them options versus dictating. That's my opinion.
So how many would be needed to make it providing options as opposed to dictating?
I don't know. I just think if the state is talking about mixed use, let's throw that in there, right?
We are not
mixed-
talking
mixed
about
use-
mixed use
mixed-
for this. This is
Yeah,
just
mixed
about
use.
housing.
Mm.
That's in a 3A context, which is to be addressed later.
So if we wanted to talk about any potential viable option, that would include anything in town that is not part of a floodplain or part of a high-risk coastal area. And we went to the town, we said, do you like these sites? Let us know. If there's other sites we should be looking at, let us know. It put the pins all over the map wherever you feel like you would see support. And those are things that we did and that we looked into. The public did make some recommendations to things. Most of their recommendations were for areas that were not viable or that we wouldn't be able to target for development.
So I think the only added point to what Josie was saying is, right now, I think we're in agreement, Greystone Road. We're in agreement with Ward Road. I'm just looking at the ones that are highlighted. We're in agreement with Coast Guard site, and we're in agreement with Country Club. I think on the housing authority, on the housing location, if we include that in Emerald Road and then,
Community
Greystone
center,
is-
the community center.
Let me finish, Josie. Greystone is the one that we can build out with the Spindrift, but you also wanted to add the Valley Road Community Center.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's fine.
If we just add the Valley Road Community Center, then I think that's sufficient. Pat, your hand's up. John, can you unmute Patrick for us?
All right, Pat, you should have had a thing pop up on you.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. My question was, I believe earlier at an earlier meeting, somebody said that if there were some floodplain concerns or wetlands concerns that we couldn't use it as a 3A unless it was included in a housing production plan as a recommended opportunity site. So I'm just a little concerned about the leaving out Bass Point and also the current mixed use business district from the opportunity sites. So maybe you could talk to that a bit.
So what we talked about before was that there's this a whole list of excluded land, and excluded land will include anything that is municipally owned, because they're looking at it and making sure that nobody sabotages their 3A zoning by saying we're just going to zone the town hall and the baseball field and know that we own them and we're never going to put out a development RFP and it'll never happen. So because we're looking at a lot of sites that are owned by the town, because Nahant owns this land, particularly the Coast Guard site and 50 Greystone, I think the town owns the Ward Road sites as well. By identifying them here, it would mean that we wouldn't need to have any other additional permission or justification from the Office of Housing and Livable Communities to justify that. And we could just say it's identified in the housing production plan, so it would be okay to go ahead and do. So that's not necessarily a floodplain thing as much as it is any kind of land that falls into this excluded land category. And there's lots of reasons as to why that could happen. Being in a floodplain or being municipally owned are two of those things.
So basically, if we were to, since Bass Point and the business district also have floodplain concerns, it seems like we would have to include them here in order to overcome that 3A approval requirement.
There's a little bit of floodplain up here. I think that would be an easy conversation to have. I'm not too worried about that one. Bass Point, I think, is going to be a little bit more challenging, and it's more challenging for a handful of reasons. Number one is that we didn't really see any public support that indicated that they wanted to see anything different happen there. It is affected by the high coastal areas, and there's a little bit of a floodplain towards the top of the property. Also, all the same concerns as to why we want to take off the Spring and Flash Road sites and why it's been recommended that we take off this housing authority site. We're also not likely to see any development there. And realistically, if this was going to get redeveloped as part of 3A, it would need to be extremely dense to do so. And I know there's been some conversation about, well, maybe we could just rezone Bass Point and call it a day. Realistically, to meet the size of the units that have to get built under 3A and the amount of units that would have to get built under 3A, even if we were doing a one-to-one replacement of the number of units that are there versus what could be built under 3A, it would be a very large, very dense development. And it would have a lot of other additional concerns that people are talking about, that there's already
How does
too
that
much
make sense?
density
I
in the
mean,
area.
honestly, how does that make sense? Because, you know, we've got 120 units there, and how dense does a 3A density have to be?
So it has to be 15 units per acre, and your community is required to build 84 units. And they're units that have to be suitable for families with
No,
children. So that means
that's incorrect. We don't have to build, we just have to zone for the
well,
building.
you have to zone for it. That's correct. So you have to zone for units that are suitable for families with children, which means you can't restrict the number of rooms, which means you're looking at minimum 2-bedroom apartments that would be replacing a lot of studios and 1-bedrooms that exist there. So
Do
if
we
we
know
were
what the
to,
breakdown is of the Bass Point apartments?
I
Patrick,
don't
we
know.
probably can get that from Sheila through the assessment records.
Yeah, I think we can. I believe they're majority studio and 1-bedroom. I think there's very limited 2-bedrooms there. But either way, we're talking about a very dense development. We'd be talking about much larger units that are there, a much larger development than what currently exists. All this for a place where there was no public support saying that they would like to see something different happen there. So we're focusing primarily on the areas that this committee had previously looked at, identified as places to look at, places that the town identified that we should look at, and then took to the public for their feedback.
That just seems like spin to me, honestly. I feel like, you know, we don't have a lot of support townwide for the number of units that you're talking about being built in any one particular location. So I think it's important to have more places in town to develop more units. I just feel like if we don't include Bass Point or the business districts, then we're missing opportunities, and this isn't going to be a very good plan.
Where is the missed opportunity at Bass Point? We're talking about a place that has a lot of sea level risk and is already fully developed.
Well, the opportunity is to regulatory compliance. I mean, 3A is in part a meeting our regulatory compliance issues, and if we're not affording ourselves the opportunity later on, if we omit it from this plan, what you're telling me is that it's very likely to be rejected from a 3A overlay. So you know, I think it's a mistake, a fatal mistake to reject at this point Bass Point or really any of these other opportunity sites. If anything, we should be expanding the opportunity sites. That doesn't lose us anything. It's constraining us on the 3A if we omit it.
So I think, Patrick, what you're saying is we should try to take credit for the existence of Bass Point as part of the opportunity sites.
I'm telling you, you're not going to get credit unless you keep it in this plan.
Is there a downside to keeping it in the plan?
The downside is that the goal of this plan is supposed to be to add more affordable units to the existing housing stock and to try to make any kind of measurable progress we can, either towards increasing the SHI or, has been brought up a couple of times tonight, increasing that GLAM percentage that could keep 40Bs at bay. If we start identifying sites that are unlikely to be developed, it says that there really isn't a desire to make any kind of progress on those fronts.
So do we think, is the I think, Patrick, we're focused on the housing plan, but I know there's an overlap with 3A. Can we come back to this when we get more into the discussion on 3A?
No, I don't think we can. I think it's
Okay.
tied together. I think if we lose this opportunity to put it as to label it as an opportunity site, then we lose 3A. I think it's I really just feel like, you know, regulatory compliance is a key factor in this plan. I don't, and we're not going to get there without Bass Point being in the mix, and I think our B1 is also needs to be in the mix. I feel like we're being forced into development we don't necessarily want. You know, and we're going to be, yes, I just don't think that MAPC is really being, you know, I think they're pushing us in a direction that the town doesn't want to go unnecessarily. I think we can comply with our 3A requirements, and also add some housing here and there and get some good ADU. You know, we can definitely create new housing, but again, we're a small town, and you know, we have to be realistic about our expectations about what we can actually build in this small town.
Can
So
we
I agree
clarify
with
that these,
B1, but
sorry,
I guess what I struggle with is because the Bass Point apartment is built out and there is still, you know, there is still an opportunity for something, you know, in that corner over there. What's
It's
the
irrelevant.
likelihood of,
It is irrelevant.
Why?
3A is about zoning, not about what can be built by right, not about
Okay.
what can be built in the future. It's a knock everything down, what can we build regulation. So you know, most of Nahant is, I mean, 30% of Nahant has multifamily as exists. It's just not by right.
Mhm.
If we cobble that together, I think we're a top 50 most highly dense community.
Yeah.
So, you know, forcing us to become even more dense without any acknowledgement for the density that we have and the housing that we have,
Okay.
I think is dishonest by the state, quite frankly. And if we're not going to get credit for some of our existing multifamily units, I think that's a real travesty. And I think we're going to end up as one of those communities on the other side of this issue if we don't get credit. Quite frankly, we're not going to be able to comply.
So let me ask this, John, if we include it, in worst case scenario, the state rejects it, then we would have to come back to them with a replacement. Is that right?
Not necessarily. I mean, if we're
Okay.
talking about this through the lens of the housing production plan, which again is just places where it would make sense to be able to do development to hit that SHI number or hit that GLAM number. That is the purpose of this document. That is the purpose of why we're here trying to do this. So it is possible that they will look at this, because we have to make the case to say this is a good location to do this. And I don't see how we can really make that case. We've excluded other sites because of concerns about environmental issues and sea level rise, and excluding sites that don't have a lot of public support. So what you're asking, Pat, is for us to make a case to the state that says, even though this location didn't receive a lot of public support, and even though it is here for reasons why we've excluded other properties, and it's already fully built out without any kind of indication that it's going to change anytime soon, this is why it makes sense to build there. And that is a very difficult argument to make.
I
let me clarify.
I disagree 100% with that statement. 100%.
Can I just clarify that the map that we've got in front of us now is not meant to address 3A purposes. It's developed for HPP and 40B purposes, putting to one side the 3A discussions that we've yet to switch to. Is that much correct?
That is correct, Mike. The only thing that I would add to that is that anything that's included in here can make it easier to be part of a 3A district a little bit later on if there's some kind of contention around things that we would have to explain as to why they were included. Either way, regardless as to whether or not Bass Point is included as a recommended site in the HPP, it would still be a very interesting point of discussion for 3A no matter what.
So we could end up having another similar slides of recommended opportunity sites viewed through the lens of 3A, which is somewhat independent of what we have before us now.
That's absolutely not correct. This has to be in the housing production plan from what the MAPC has told us.
It does not have to be in the housing production
It
plan,
has
no.
to be if we want to overcome the floodplain concerns.
Is that right,
John,
John?
do you need to?
It has, what the situation is that we could bypass it and say that this is a reason as to why it's identified, and we would have to say, make a lot of justification as to why the floodplain doesn't matter and things like that. It would still be subject to all the other floodplain overlay issues and things like that, which make it a little bit more challenging. And we also do have, again, another area where we've identified a handful of different places that could kind of make sense for 3A and what our recommendations are on how to focus efforts moving forward based on public opinion. So regardless of what happens, if it's identified or if it's not identified, it's going to be a challenging site to get through an HPP recommendation, let alone get to the point where we can have a conversation with 3A about it. If we're looking at this through the lens of solely, well, if we identify it here, it's all well and good, and we can just call it a 3A point in 3 area and call it a day, we still have additional challenges, and it's just not that simple.
Well, I'd like to just add that, first of all, I think Pat has a strong point that he's making, and I would be supportive of it from what I know now. And I would also underline the fact that one of the goals of this committee, I hope, is to come up with a plan that is consistent with Nahant's culture, with this, yes, we need more housing, but we want to do it in a way that preserves the Nahant that we know and that we've lived in. In a couple of months, I will have lived here 50 years. And I like that. I love this town, and I don't want to see it changed radically. I don't think it has to be changed radically. And I hope that Mark and Tony are informing the MAPC people that we have local interests, and we are trying to preserve our local interests while complying with the law. And that's my point of view.
I'm just going to add, I do think Pat has some interesting points, and I think largely when I look at these opportunity sites that we have here, the greatest weight that you're putting on them right now is how the public responded to them. And I think that I don't think that the public has a historical understanding of what happened at Bass Point. And I do, as not only as a member, as a long-term resident of the Nahant, but as town administrator for 20 years, almost 20 years. The reason we have Bass Point apartments is because in the late 70s and 80s, the town was afraid of condominiums. They didn't understand condominiums. That's what was originally proposed there by the Franchi company who owns that property. And they ended up backtracking and putting rental units out there. I know for a fact that that the current owners of that property may be interested at some point in the future of redeveloping that site. Those buildings are old, they're not well built, they're inefficient, they're not sustainable. And they may even consider a friendly 40B at some point. So I do think it's important that we include that. And I don't think that, to respect that the people who responded to our survey attended our forum have a full understanding of the whole development of that area, what happened in the past, and what perhaps the current owners of that property would be interested in. So I don't think we should disregard it. I think it's important to consider. And if we can somehow include it, I think it would be important.
And I respectfully suggest that putting too much weight on public input is not going to serve us well, because the public was asked to make quick and hasty decisions based on what amounted to asking them to drink from a fire hose of information. There was way too much going on for them to properly absorb and to have this survey be given the weight that it seems to have taken on here.
I agree, Mike.
Josie, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just think, even though I want to give as many options as possible, I just keep going back to the fact that if you're going to include it, what is going to be the rationale for not including all the other flood zones? That is a very interesting and powerful conversation right there. And the second thing is, how difficult would it be to get it through the state? So, I mean, we could certainly include it for option purposes, but if we're going to have challenges getting it through the state, and then other folks in other flood zones are not going to be pleased, I just kind of want to give you the devil's advocate side. I'm neutral either way.
I don't think the entire site is in the flood zone. I think most of the units on the point are probably not in the flood zone.
Yeah, it's the recreational areas. I think there's some tennis courts and some other stuff up here
Yeah.
on the north end of the parcel that are in the flood zone.
Definitely.
They all are in the flood zone. Yeah.
No, I don't think the buildings are.
The rest of it around the coast there is part of the high-risk coastal area. That's the other big concern there.
That's right. That's true, John. But I don't believe that the units themselves are in the flood zone.
Right.
And the other question I have for you is, why do they need to be 2 bedrooms apartments? If the definition of family is a 1-person household, why would it need to be a 2-bedroom? I'm not very clear on that.
So under 3A, it says the units have to be suitable for families with children. And that means more than 1 bedroom. And it means that the number of bedrooms cannot be restricted. A lot of times there'll be these zoning codes where they want to have certain types of folks at certain stages of their life move in. So a lot of senior apartments are typically not just age restricted, but bedroom restricted as well, and have the number of occupants restricted. It's usually just 2 people, a married couple usually.
Right.
When we're talking about family units in terms of development, those are units that are more than 1 bedroom.
So do we feel like we're building consensus to include it? I feel like my views are now shifting listening to this.
I'm inclined to include it.
Me too.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
Okay. Well, what
All right.
we'll do on our end is spend some time seeing if there's any other kinds of sites similar to this that have been approved recently by the state. We may need to have some kind of some conversations with them to see if they feel it's appropriate or if there would be a strong cause for rejection. And in the meantime, we'll also do a little bit of research on the other 2 sites that were identified. But just so we're clear, we're feeling good about everything else that's highlighted here, except for this housing authority site. Yeah. I'm not hearing any other kinds of concern or opposition to 50 Greystone or Wardwright or Coast Guard or anything else. So
yeah, I mean, I would just expand 50 Greystone to include the other properties. And I would also say on number 4, I think we really need to include more of the business district, because I think that's, that's a 40R opportunity right there for redevelopment. We've got some single family there. We've got some, not mixed use going on. There's seems to me a big opportunity there that, we could get some mixed use with some low income mixed in there.
Yeah,
That's-
I agree entirely, and that's why we're recommending that it makes more sense for a 3A area and not just a housing area. So I think we'll be okay having a conversation and talking about this is already a dense mixed use area, regardless of the few parcels that are part of the floodplain over here. So I'm not worried about needing to include that here in order for that to be a strong 3A area. I think we have a lot of support, a lot of good reasons as to why we can make sense and make the case for that. If we add it here, we're really just talking about we want it to be used only for housing. And you can potentially lose that mixed use business stuff if we include that there. Because if somebody did want to do a 40B, they would use the housing production plan against the town and say, you identified this as an area for housing. We are building housing here and getting rid of whatever else is already existing. So that's why we are not making any kind of recommendations that any of this be included on the HPP side.
If I understand you correct, John, I mean, I think I agree with that. But I do believe it has great potential for mixed use development. That could include housing and retail.
This is Bass Point, Mark, you're talking about?
No, I'm
No.
talking
We're talking about
Right.
the area near the Nahant and Spring Road right here.
right.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
downside is, as I understand, is you're saying that the housing production plan could be used
Right.
by 40B proponent to justify overriding the local any local restrictions on the site plan.
Yeah, and they have the authority to kind of do that wherever they see fit anyways, as long as it kind of works out with the development. But it definitely adds some more ammo to their argument if they are able to pick something out of an HPP site. And that's when it just kind of walks that line between, maybe on paper it looks like a friendly 40B, but in real life it's a little bit more of an unfriendly hostile 40B. So I would be very leery about including the stuff there as being targeted only for housing development. If we have that conversation here and keep having that conversation as part of 3A, we can do a little bit more to say, let's incentivize some mixed use, or let's include some mixed use or mandate some mixed use or something like that. And that's also why we had these parcels for Nahant and Greystone separated as well. So we took a look at everything that bordered Nahant Road and said this could make sense for a 3 area if we wanted to include incentivized mixed use, and then keep 50 Greystone separate just for a housing aspect of it.
Yeah, I guess the only concern I would have is the floodplain issue, because that those are also impacted by that same issue as Bass Point. So if that's going to be, on paper, concern to the state and improving any 3A for compliance reasons, then I would say that maybe that's worth taking that risk on the 40B, unfriendly 40B. But I could go either way on that one. But if you think that we could definitely get that one through without any problem. But it seems it's a high risk either way, because we get this housing production plan approved and then we go to 3A, and if that gets rejected, then there's not really an opportunity to go back and fix it.
There will be opportunities to go back and fix the 3A zoning because of the way the timeline works. And the HPP is a document with a relatively short lifespan. These are 5-year plans. So there's certainly opportunity to think about it, especially since it's the first one, see what works, see what didn't, and be able to move forward from there.
Can we amend it within the 5-year to add an opportunity site?
I want to say yes. I don't know what the process of that is though. So I'll find out for sure and I'll let you guys know. In the meantime, what we'll do is we feel like we're in good agreement on Ward Road, Coast Guard, 50 Greystone, and the Country Club site. We're going to do a little bit of some extra work trying to see if there's other things like Bass Point that have been able to get through state approval. We're going to take a look at the Road stuff and this B2 zoned property that's the Historical Society and a handful of other tenants. And aside from those handful of things that we're still working on figuring out, I think that we're in a good spot. And I think that we have a lot of consensus here. And I think a lot of what we're seeing tonight in a lot of these conversations is very much in line with what the public likes to see here. So those are my thoughts on it. We're going to keep looking at this and try to flush this out a little bit more and to see kind of where we can say this is how we want to focus our efforts moving forward a little bit. And with that in mind, what our next steps are going to be moving forward, just so we're all clear and on the same page. And I know we're pushing to 9:15 right now. So seeing that we have a lot of consensus and a little bit of work on our end to reach a full consensus that we'll be able to take, I want to just kind of get things lined up so everyone's aware of how things are going to go. So we're going to start drafting this report and doing a little bit more information on my research on those sites. Jim, what's up?
I just, I'm not sure that there is a consensus at all on the Valley Road School Community Center site. I've heard one opinion strongly in favor of including that. For those of us who have been around a while, we know how the development of that site for a community center and the Historical Society went down. And I'm not sure any of us really want to revisit that fight. So I respect Josie's opinion. It is not mine. And I question whether other people are supporting including that as a housing option.
Well, I don't think there's any risk, Jim, of including it, because let's face it, any of these development sites is probably going to require, especially the public property ones, it's going to require a town meeting vote. And we can all certainly express our opinion at town meeting. But I do, I think it's a legitimate request. Personally, I agree with you. I wouldn't vote for it, but I think it's a legitimate request, and I don't have a problem with putting it in there.
So what we can do as well is we can take a look at it. We can say we're going to go ahead and put this in a draft to kind of take a look at. And then if we want to strike it and remove it from the draft based on the other information we have on the site, that's something that we can certainly do.
It's also to be remembered that the town.
From my point of view, only because I've seen existing buildings converted faster than brand new buildings. And so if we want to try to expedite the timeline, it might be an option. And the tenants can be moved. There's other options within town.
Well,
just for the
it's
consideration.
it's much more complicated than that. The Nahant Preservation Trust has a long-term lease on the property.
That's
And that's not to be wiped away with the snap of a fingers, not to mention the fact that the tenants there have a lot of political sway. So to the extent that you want to expand the options that are before the townspeople so that they don't feel like something is being rammed down their throat, I don't have a problem for it to be included. I can virtually guarantee you that the suggestion in the minds of the townspeople, it'll go down in flames, but it will expand the options that are available to them.
The only other thing I would highlight is we do not have inventory of rentals where people can just move, from one apartment to another or move a business from one place to the other. So when we talk about the Valley Road School and an option, right? The people that are renting there are renting there because they want to do business in Nahant. There isn't an option for other rental businesses in Nahant. So we've got to just be, I'm fine including it. I'm not in favor of it, but let's include it. To Mark's point and Jim's point, it has to go to town meeting for a vote. Let the voters decide.
Okay.
The HPP does not get approved by town meeting.
No, but the development sites will. So that's the point. Like if we, started drilling down later after the plan has been approved by the state, and now either it's this committee or new committees constituted, and they start doing an RFI or an RFP you know, and trying to put data together, it would have to go to town meeting to say, okay, here are 3 sites we can build, 3 developers lined up. Which one do you want to go with? You know, I'm just using it as an example, but not to say that's going to come to fruition.
Because that in particular is public property.
Mhm.
It's owned by the town of Nahant. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. That's
Excellent.
something we can add in. If we take a look at it a little bit later on, you guys all come back and have a little bit more time to think about it. You take a look at the draft that we put together and you say, you know what? After all the stuff that we've thought about, we really don't want it included. We'll take it out at that point. So I'd say it's any of the stuff that was identified tonight, those 2 new sites, we'll put those a little bit into a maybe category, and then once we have some more information, share all that with you all, and we'll use that as a bit of a guiding force to move forward. So I don't know if that necessarily means another meeting like this, but it could end up Michelle with like an email vote or something like that.
Yep.
So we'll see what we need to do to move forward in a way that's efficient and transparent. Any other thoughts on the things that we discussed before I revisit the timeline?
No, I'm good.
I know it's getting like, thank you guys for sticking with me with all of this stuff, because I know it's a lot. So what we're looking at here is drafting the report between the rest of this month and into September. We plan on having that ready the week of September 11th, and we'll send the draft report to the town and the committee. And then whatever sorts of things you guys have as far as feedback wise, send that over, let us know. So many of you have been really so great about that throughout this whole process, and we really do appreciate it. This is where it's going to be really, really important. The week of September 18th, likely have another committee meeting to finalize the report. Maybe that'll get pushed back a week. We'll see what happens. And then in October, we'll be delivering the final report to the town. And the town will distribute that to the planning board and the board of selectmen. And then we're looking forward ahead into the end of October, week of October 16th or 23rd, looking at a joint board meeting of the planning board and the board of selectmen to consider the HPP for adoption. And that would be a public hearing where members of the public would show up and either lend their support or their criticisms, or a combination of both. And we would hope that everybody's really on board with this at this point. And really put themselves in a position to say, make sure that you're attending that public hearing, attending that meeting, speaking up, advocating for the plan, and advocating for the decisions that were made. So that way you can let the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board know that this is something that you guys really feel strongly about and really feel as though needs to move forward. So that's our big ask moving forward on this, in addition to the handful of other sites that we just kind of talked through that need a little bit of a different look. Our big asks of you guys are to really, really go through the report that we send with a fine-tooth comb. Let us know whatever it is that we need to know as a result of it, and be in a good position to have a conversation about it when we meet, and then a conversation with the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. So everything else on here are just other miscellaneous older slides that talk about other maps just for points of reference and things like that. So we don't need to go through any of that while we're here. And I think that wraps everything up on my end for tonight, Michelle.
So John, can you return the host back to me?
Sure can. Let's
Thank you.
find you on this list here.
All right, so that was great. I know we're after time, but we're going to still continue. So the next thing on the agenda was committee old business. I don't have any old business, but I will ask the committee if there's anything that they wanted to cover or talk about tonight.
I want to have dinner.
We'll get there. Sounds like there's no old business. Okay, is there any committee new business? Anything that we need to talk about tonight that we want to open up? Seeing none. Okay. Lastly is citizens forum. The chat's available if anybody wants to type questions. If you want to raise your hand, you should be able to unmute yourself, and like to make sure we have residents that can respond if they have any questions, comments. Give folks a few minutes. I'm going to check the chat. Any resident comments?
Hello?
Hi, can you just say your name and your address, please?
Yep, Carrie Alice Collins, 22 Breezy Hill Terrace. I am a big no for the Valley Road School as being on that map. Like Jim said, there is a huge history there. That is one of the only places that people gather and enjoy each other's company. And I really don't think that putting this on a map as a viable place for affordable housing, it really is going to make you guys look like bad. I mean, I don't even know how else to say it. It is a community building. It was fought to be that. And there are plenty of other options. Please do not do that. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Carrie. There's a comment in the chat. I know it was mentioned that some folks were in favor of Spring Road sites, but it was shown in the map that feedback was not favorable. So for the record, can we have this removed? So there's a citizen that's asking that, you know, we'd not consider Spring Road. All right. Still available for public comment. If there's anybody else that has anything they'd like to ask of the committee, any questions or feedback?
I just have one question. This is Ben Harvey from 115 Flash Road. And the question is just, I heard from the committee a pretty strong statement that we wanted to have the Bass apartments included in this. But then I guess from the consultant, I just kept hearing kind of a little bit of a pushback of, well, we'll consider it on our side and talk to the state and see whether it's viable. And my question is just, if the committee's saying we want it on there, whether the state sees it as viable or not, if this is a statement from our town, should we just have it on there if that's the feeling of the majority of the committee, whether the state sees it as the most feasible site or not?
Thank you.
Well, let me just say, in response to that, Michelle, that MAPC is our consultant. They are not the state. And I think what I heard from MAPC, our consultant, is that they're going to take a look at this and get back to us on it. Is that right, John? Is John gone?
I'm right here. Yeah,
Uh,
that's correct, Mark. We're going to be doing additional research on that and then let you guys know kind of where things stand.
Okay, thank you.
The
Well,
next,
actually, let
no.
me,
Michael, I want to hold on. I want to have citizens' comments first. The next one is the person that's 724 Zoom. And if you could just say your name and address, please.
Of course, Liz Desmond, 40 Spring Road.
Thank you.
Thank you to the committee members who realize that town housing affects all residents, but especially the residents who live adjacent to the current structures. As I said, I live on Spring Road. Spring Road cannot support any more town housing. It's already a densely populated area. We can't have more residents, traffic, noise, and frequent police activity. Earlier, the presenter said that this was not a recommended site due to concerns from the neighbors. So why is it on the map as a proposed site?
I think it's on the map as possible development because we're looking to modernize those buildings and expand a little bit.
The word
But-
expand has all the neighbors concerned on
I
Spring
know.
Road.
I know. Your feedback's appreciated, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, now you can have the floor. And then Kelsey Anderson.
okay, I just want to confirm the understanding of our consultant as to the nature of their engagement. I sort of got the sense that the consultants were planning to produce their output, and it sounded as if this was going to go forward with or without the concurrence or approval of the remainder of this committee. Have I misunderstood that?
I don't think I understand a question, Mike.
I thought I understood the consultants to say that their output was going to be their output, and it was going to go forward to the other bodies of the town, with or without the favorable endorsement of the other members of the community, of this committee.
No, we're going to review and sign off on the report that goes out. So we will be able to have an opportunity to review it, redline it, provide feedback right in writing back to MAPC.
So
But,
who's,
And who decides whether our input is incorporated or rejected by MAPC?
Well, we can meet with MAPC and do a meeting to go through your comments and talk and certainly go through those to make sure that, we want this in, we want that in, we can certainly, we've got another week or 2 more weeks before the first draft comes out, so we can meet next week and get into the details on how we want to organize, redlining that document and the updates and what gets approved and not.
So to the extent that the committee cannot come to agreement with the consultant about something, who decides?
We'll take it to a
What-
vote on the committee.
Okay,
Okay.
and the vote will govern. Okay,
The vote will
thank
govern.
you.
So-
Everything has been consensus building, so we've had not needed to do that, but if we get to sticky topics, we will do that. Jim, before I go to you, I want to have Kelsey Anderson, a member of the public, and then I'll come back to you.
Hello, Kelsey Anderson, 42 Spring Road. I just want to echo my concerns around the expansion, the proposed expansion. I think Liz shared her sentiments. Just wanted to make sure that our voices are heard as neighbors. And also wanted to point out, or I guess I have a question of why it is being included if it is in the flood zone.
Michelle, can I respond quickly on
Yeah,
that?
go ahead.
First of all, I don't know if anybody has recommended an expansion. My position on this is that I think those buildings on Spring Road and Emerald Road have reached their useful life. They are very unattractive. They're not serving the purpose that they could serve. Whether it's expansion or not, I think we can do an improvement in that area with some housing. It's as simple as that. It's not necessarily an expansion.
Okay, I just have concerns about how densely populated it already is. So I just want to make sure that our voices are heard as neighbors because there is frequent police activity and whatnot. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. All right, I have a comment in the chat. Someone is asking, are the flood zone areas going to be removed from the map and when? So this committee is not responsible for dictating the flood zone areas that are on the map and those that have been available through FEMA and those sources. So I think that's more of a question for town hall. The next question is, how will Governor Healy's state of emergency work with this plan? It's a good question. I don't know. In terms of the migrants, nothing's been presented before the town that I know of.
Well, my question about that is around, John and Alex had referenced earlier how there's a select population of Nahanters and residents that will be on the list. But as I understand it, I think 20,000 migrants that have come in and a state of emergency has been declared. Just wondering how that would impact the list. Is it true that, Nahant population will be integrated into this list, or do folks that need this assistance go at the top? Will they trump, the other Nahant residents?
I don't know how, I can't answer that. And it would only really apply once we have a development in place and, working on a development agreement. And I think we're, a few years away from that, frankly. But it's a good question, and we can, definitely, research it and come back.
Does
That was
John
Liz that was speaking, right?
John, do you have any input on that?
I don't have any input on that at this time, no. We don't have any details on what's happening as far as this emergency declaration or how it impacts this work. And realistically, emergency declarations are short-term things. Plans are long-term things. So we're looking at things through a little bit of a different lens that way. If we were to be told anything from the state that says these are things that need to be mandated into an HPP process or changes that we'd have to make to include things like that, we would know about it and we would take those steps. As it is for right now, we don't see any bearing on any of that stuff having a direct effect on this work.
Okay, great.
However, that was one of the reasons why Josie, had brought this up to find out what the prioritization is. And the consultant did say that they would come back with some more information for us because there is a priority for this housing and the public should be informed of what the current priority is and the long-term priorities.
You mean eligibility?
Yeah.
Yes. All right, Jim, I think you wanted to speak, and then Kelsey, I see your hands up, so we'll get back to you in a moment.
Oh, I just wanted to be clear that the report that is generated from this committee is from the committee. Is that correct? As opposed to from the consultants?
Yes, Jim, it will be it'll be from the committee, like in partnership with MAPC, but it's your plan. It's your plan. It's your HPP. It is for you, the town, by the town, and all that stuff that Michelle talked about with consensus building. That's kind of where we're at. So we want you all to take ownership of it. We're a vessel, we're a vessel to blend in all the stuff you guys have told us and all the stuff the public has told us into something that can hopefully work. So that's where we're at. It's not our plan, it's your plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I have 9:28. Is there any more public comments? Any more comments from the committee?
You were going back to someone after Jim.
It was Kelsey, and I don't see her hand raised anymore. All right, one more question. I think I have a comment in the chat. I don't believe Nahant residents fully understand these proposed housing units are offered to people across the Commonwealth, and Nahant residents only have a few slots. Correct. We need to do more education and awareness on how what would be made available to Nahant residents if there was a development going forward, and working with a developer on a development agreement to help prioritize Nahant residents.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, no problem.
Could I comment on that, Michelle?
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Just quickly, sorry, I know we're running late. Something that was said earlier about that with the local preference being available on a per plan basis or per site basis or per agreement basis. It sounds like we could also, as part of a townwide or bylaw, make that a requirement for all sites going forward or all developments going forward. I would like a little bit more information on that.
That's creative, Patrick.
Make what a requirement?
Make it a
The
bylaw
local
requirement.
preference. Yeah, so instead of doing it per development, just have it be a basic requirement in town. If you're going to do a 40B development or a comprehensive permit, just make that as a requirement.
I would love to
Right in
see
the
that
bylaw.
personally, but I'm not sure that would pass. So it's important that the public truly understand the impact of local preference or not, and what the prioritization is, because most communities do not understand that impact.
Okay, Kelsey, one more comment and then,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, I think it's in relation to the conversation, but when the consultants lead with the data around the demographics of Nahant, how many older people live here, younger people, I think that's misleading to the conversation and people understanding what this is all about, because that kind of frames it in a way to say, we're trying to look out for the people of Nahant. And so I just want to make sure that, again, people truly understand what's trying to be achieved here. It's more housing, right? Versus more housing for Nahant people.
Yeah, great point. All right. If there anybody else that has not commented from the public? Okay. Committee members, are we all set?
Dinner time.
Move to adjourn.
All right. May I have a motion to
Second.
adjourn?
Seconded.
Second.
Josie seconds. Roll call vote. Michael,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Lynn,
Yes.
Josie,
Aye.
Pat,
Aye.
Patty.
Aye.
Okay, we have a unanimous vote. We are adjourning at 9:32 PM. Thank you very much. Thank you to the members of the public for staying on tonight. I'll be following up with some notes and we will likely have another meeting next week. So plan your calendars. Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.